Sorry about that, folks, and welcome to the Marine Forum. Welcome to Edinburgh. It's nice to see you all, and with this, we're going to kick off the day. So a huge welcome to all of you in the audience today, both here at the National Museum of Scotland and also joining us online. So at a first step, can we ask if people online can actually hear us? We are learning about this streaming process every year. If you are online, maybe tell us where you're coming in from. Is anybody? Katie is having a look. Anybody there? Anyway, we'll keep going. It is a real joy every year for WDC Shorewatch and SMASS to put on this Marine Forum and organize these events. We're inspired mostly by the enthusiasm that you all bring throughout the year, and it's fun to let that shine on this day. So many of you will know at least some of us. This is Marielle and Rachel from SMASS. I'm Alice from WDC, and this is Katie, also from WDC Shorewatch. And we have an incredible lineup today of presenters and also interactive sessions of opportunities to discuss with a panel and plenty of time to talk amongst yourselves. So we really advise that you take advantage of that. It is, however, our first time in this very stunning venue. And while we've done our best to plan ahead for everything, there may be a few things we haven't anticipated. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask anyone on this stage or some of the museum folk who are around to help us. We're happy to help, and we want to make sure that you have a fantastic day.
Now, because this is a new venue, we're going to have some boring admin first before we kick off with the exciting stuff. I have a list. So first, there's no fire alarms planned for today, so if you do hear a fire alarm, that is real. So please do leave at the nearest exit, or at your nearest exit, which may be behind you. And our muster point is just outside as the way you came in. Toilets are located just at the front door on your right-hand side as well. Now, there's public Wi-Fi, it's NMS, there's no login or anything, so you can just log on to that and off you go. NMS Public. I don't know where that came from. It is NMS Public. It's the public Wi-Fi. Please don't log into the staff ones. They'll get very upset from the sounds of that. Also, you can access, you have your little lanyards with your name tag. On the back, there is a QR code. If you scan that, that will get you to the program for the day and also some other bits and pieces of information. And also, you will see that there is a lovely custom-designed logo of Harris Gin Distillery, specifically made for this event. More about that later. If you're going to use social media today, please feel free to take pictures. Do respect if our speakers have a no photography image on their slide. Please don't take images of those slides. But otherwise, please feel free to take as many pictures and videos as you like and put them on your social media. And if you could use the hashtag MarineForum2025, that would be great. For those of you online, that's the camera, right? For those of you online, remember, you can join anytime using the link, so even if you drop out, you can just go into the link back again. We use a chat. We'll keep an eye on that to make sure everything is going fine. And as Alice said, we are trying to increase our sort of online experience every year. We're trying something new every year. That also means we might have some unexpected snafus. So if something doesn't really work really well, please know that we're keeping an eye out and we're trying to do the best we can to make your experience as worthwhile as being in the audience today.
Okay, so you may notice a new logo on your name badge from the last years, and we need to say a huge thank you to the Seachangers Scottish Learners Fund, which has supported today a number of far-flung attendees and presenters to actually make this trip, because we recognize that some of you are coming from far and wide. I'm just going to add this in. How many of you have come from the Northern Isles? Raise your hands. Huge number. How many of you have come from the Outer Hebrides or West Coast Islands? Anybody coming up from England? Yeah? And then how many from the kind of central Scottish area? And anyone from the kind of North Murray Firth and Inverness North kind of area? So it's actually a remarkably even divide amongst all of those areas, which is really impressive, and thanks so much to Seachangers for making that possible. You may also have noticed we're in a particularly spectacular venue, and so to welcome you properly to the National Museum of Scotland, let me introduce the Principal Curator of Vertebrate Biology, Andrew Kitchener.
Well, thank you, and yes, welcome. It's very rare to see so many people in this auditorium, and so we're absolutely delighted that the Marine Forum is being held here today. And I thought I'd, just as part of that welcome, just give you a little bit of information about the collections and their history and the research that's going on here. So, if you haven't already, when you go around the exhibitions within the museum, you will hopefully see this spectacular display of animals, and I hope you'll be very impressed. We actually have 16 species of cetacean on display. They're all fakes. None of them are real. But actually, that's not quite true. There is one porpoise flipper skeleton. But the problem is you can't really do taxidermy on cetaceans. After a couple of days, they look appalling. So the best thing that we can do is actually make casts of them and paint them in pretty colors. And they're much more effective at telling us about their species than if we tried to stuff them. But of course, these 16 species we have on display is dwarfed by the more than 3,600 specimens that we have in our research collections. And this is just giving you what I think is the latest totals for various species. So it varies from 1 for a Hector's dolphin, which was actually shot by Hector himself, to over 1,500 porpoises, but there's more than this. This is just the ones that have been registered in the collection. And the oldest specimen we have is this shoulder blade, the scapula from a humpback whale, which was dug up near Blair Drummond in 1824. So this was the first cetacean that entered the collection that still survives today. But we do have a much older specimen, as people who went on the tour will know from yesterday. And this is a pizzle of a whale, which Robert Sibbald wrote about in 1697. So it was stranded in Orkney sometime in the 1690s. And yeah, it's a very impressive thing. It's not a narwhal tusk. The other exciting thing that we rediscovered in the collections was this skull of a beluga from an animal that was killed in Stirling in 1815. The salmon fishers got very upset, apparently, because it was eating salmon. It was brought to Edinburgh to be dissected by Dr. Barclay, and then some absolute dastardly person took the teeth out of the jaw. So there's a big, long story about this, and it wowed us because of the abuse this poor thing suffered post-mortem. We were able to re-identify it. Of course, one of the most famous specimens we had in the collection, or have in the collection, is the blue whale skeleton, which was on display for many years, or many decades, in fact, in what are now the Animal World galleries. And this stranded back in 1831 in North Berwick by the Knox brothers. A certain Robert Knox was involved in the Burke and Hare murders, or not actually. And eventually the museum acquired it in 1864. So it was actually the first cetacean that came into the new museum building. And we have another impressive blue whale, the jaws of which are actually on loan to the medical school across the road. But we have this fantastic watercolour painting by Sam Bow showing it stranded at Long Nidri Beach. We've not had one since. Very curious, that. A large part of the historic collection is based on the Turner collection, which was part of the university collection. And because they were converting the medical school into laboratories in the 1950s, much of that collection came to us, and it's a very important collection that we have here. But it wasn't until 1997 that staff at the museum actually plucked up courage and collected their own large whale. So Moby, whose skull you can see in the Grand Gallery at the front of the museum, was that very first specimen. And as you can see, it was huge. But impressively, it took 6 people, 6 staff, 6 days to actually remove all the bones from the skeleton. And it took a long time after that to make it bearable to the public. So the problem is that most museums don't have very many cetaceans. They're difficult to get hold of, they're difficult to process. And I guess until the 1980s, our cetacean collection was fairly typical. We had low numbers of things. We'd had a bit of an influx of specimens when the Turner collection was donated in the 1950s, but it was in the sort of late 80s going into the 90s that the numbers of specimens increased dramatically. And you can see, I've only got data up to 2012 here, but you can see there are large numbers of specimens. That's not all strandings per year, because it's just, some of it is curatorial catch-up, but it's averaging about 200 specimens a year. And this is because of our collaborations with SMASS, but also CSIP, which have actually been since the beginning of those schemes back in the early 90s. And these collaborations are extremely important to us in helping us build that collection. And we're not just collecting it just because we like to fill our shelves and think, well, we've got so many specimens. They're there for a purpose. And one of the things we've noticed is, over the years, that this intensive collecting has been occurring, is that we're getting lots of species, particularly subtropical and tropical species, which didn't used to occur in Scottish waters or even British waters, which are becoming much more common. And research has been done looking at the appearance of these particular species in Scotland and the increasing, increasing global temperatures. And it's showing that striped dolphins, for example, should have been recorded much earlier, but it wasn't until 1988 that they turned up in Scotland. And obviously this probably reflects misidentifications or a lack of recording of strandings effort previously, which just shows you how good the stranding schemes are today in picking up these new species which are coming into British waters. We've also found the first grey whale in Scotland, although it's extremely old. There are various specimens from archaeological sites in Shetland and Orkney. This one is from Jarlshof. So this is a species that used to occur in the Atlantic, and you'll get the odd vagrant coming up. But this was the first archaeological material for grey whale recorded in Britain. There have been various morphometrics and anatomical studies. These are just listing some of them. Probably our most recent one was George's discovery of all these vestigial teeth in the Southes whale skulls particularly. So we think of beaked whales as having very few teeth, but George has found very large numbers of these vestigial teeth in all the beaked whales that we've looked at, which is very good. I shall move on. And of course, we've provided lots of samples for DNA, for stable isotopes and pollutant studies across a wide range of species. So these things are not just accumulated just because it amuses us. They're there to find out about those species in the wild. They're there that we can make comparisons with what was going on in the past with today and look at trends. And we hope to keep on building that collection with your support and help, because it's extremely important, and it will be increasingly important for the future of cetaceans. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. So each edition of the Marine Forum is centred around a key theme, with the past events emphasising on the power of community and communication, collaboration, and this year we turn our focus on the meaningful change, exploring how it can be driven by evidence and action. And so throughout today's talks and interactive sessions and our panel session in the afternoon, we'll examine the evidence that is gathered and evaluated and communicated, and how this informs decision-making and conservation efforts. And so our keynote today is here to give us insights into the impacts of storytelling and how this can be a direct link to creating change. Tom Mustel is a biologist turned filmmaker and writer, specialising in stories at the intersection of people and nature. And his award-winning book, How to Speak Whale, A Voyage into the Future of Animal Communication, was named New York Best Book of 2022. And his film collaborations include working with Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough, and they have won 2 Webbies, a BAFTA, and an Emmy nomination. And they have gone viral and been showcased at the UN in Times Square and even on the Pyramid Stage in Glastonbury. Based in Brighton, Tom is also an ambassador for Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and please help me to welcome him to the stage.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Great. So I was just going to give the talk for my book that I developed when I brought my book out, but then Alice and Andrew told me about this community and what an unusual group of people are gathering here, and I heard it was really friendly, it was really engaged, and the more I learnt about you, the more I thought I should do something that was kind of specifically for you. So I wrote a totally new talk on the train on the way up. So apologies, multiple apologies. Apologies to the tech team here who have been dealing with the fallout from me writing it on Keynote and then turning it into PowerPoint. Imagine the fonts are much sexier. And apologies to people watching on Zoom. I have got loads of slides and I'm going to speak really fast to do them. I'm not on 1.5 speed. I'm just going to do this really quickly because I want to kind of get this across to all of you today. This talk, I'll start, it's kind of sort of trying to reflect on what I've gone through and what could be useful to you in your communities and in your work. And so this is me when I began. I was a conservation biologist. This is in Mauritius. That's a giant tortoise that often ate my lunch. I thought at that stage that telling stories was, on film, was just like a really expensive PowerPoint. You know, you have the kind of the beginning, you've got the data, and then you just kind of explain a thesis, and it starts like an academic paper. You summarize it, then you introduce the context, then you say what you've done, then you talk about what the implications might be, and then you tell everybody in the credits what it is, and you just get loads more money to spend on it to make it look really good. And that was totally wrong, but it's taken me my whole career to realize it. So I'm hoping that if any of you are in that boat, I can shortcut that process today. So here's what I have learned. I started work on a program called Inside Nature's Giants, or rather I've made a bunch of films, but this was the first series that I directed on. I've also done things like, as in that nice introduction, I've done virals, I've done immersive sound installations, I've done computer games, I've done podcasts, I've tried everything. I'm rubbish at lots of them. As Andrew will attest, I wrote a newspaper article for The Guardian. They asked for 800 words. I interviewed 7 people for 2 hours, and it took me 3 months. Now I know that's not what I'm good at. I've tried to find a few general kind of learnings that I've picked up along the way. So, in Inside Nature's Giants, this is a sperm whale. It beached in Pegwell Bay in Kent, where Julius Caesar brought his triremes ashore 2,000 years ago. For the same reason that Julius Caesar chose it, nice, shallow, sandy beach, that's why it's so good for lots of cetaceans beaching there. We had 2 days. The police said that we could get in and out, and we were allowed to dissect the whale with Rob DeVille and the Stranding's team from the south. And they wanted us to do that because they had no idea what to do with the whale. The tide was coming in and out. I had a script. I had done my research. I was ready in case that happened. I knew all the whale anatomy that we were going to cover. Joy Reidenberg, the amazing anatomist, was taking us all through it. But this is the bit that everyone remembered, which was not in my script.
Very, very tough, very stiff blubber. It's coming off really well, though. It's really fresh, that's why. It's in really, really good shape. This is actually the fat layer underneath the blubber. This is not part of the blubber. The blubber is actually this tough material here. So there's blubber, then fat, then muscle. This is connective tissue related to the muscles. These very strong bands that hold it in place. Now there's huge tension on this. It's about to come off. That will weigh a massive amount. A as it pulls up. It's giving us access to both the thoracic cavity, the heart and the lungs underneath that, and the ribs, and at the back, the digestive system. That's gone. That's brilliant. Now we can actually get into the organs underneath. It's really exciting, but the time is marching on.
It's really, really fresh. I don't smell anything. It's like walking down the butcher's aisle in the supermarket. All the meat's really fresh here. This animal, I think, is only around 24 hours dead. So we gotta wipe, get my face wiped down around my lips. Fine. The most dangerous thing is if you get it in your eyes or in your mouth, and so I know enough to keep my mouth shut.
So that wasn't in my script, but that was the bit that everyone remembered. Joy actually was kind of gut exploded on her face 3 times, and later on we had to baby wipe her tongue, which Channel 4 thought was too much. Now, that was the thing that everyone remembered. And what I was struck by was loads of people who came and talked to me after it went out. They mentioned this bit, but then somehow they'd memorized all the other functional anatomy. They knew about all the other bits. So weirdly, this gut explosion was the thing that allowed their minds to bind onto all the information that I'd had in my script leading up to it. When it went out in the States, they didn't have our presenters in this show. They got rid of Mark, they got rid of Joy, because they needed more adverts. And they thought, let's just make it just the anatomy. And so the poor American viewers were treated to like 45 minutes of straight dissection with very little context, and it bombed. They didn't like it, because that was the other thing. In order to go into these animals, in order to allow people to overcome, I mean, in this room, I didn't have to give a trigger warning for this. This is your deal. But like, for most people, this can be quite intimidating going into these bodies. And it was through the people and their reactions and their interactions that draws the general audience in. I next worked on a show called The Batman of Mexico with David Attenborough, and this was a documentary about bats, and people hated bats. So what we realized was these bats pollinate the tequila agave, so we thought people liked tequila, so we made it about tequila and bats, and tequila fans flocked to the film. Rodrigo became National Geographic's first explorer in residence, and the film's success has played a big part in his ability to save the ecosystems the bats go in, but this is just by finding these tiny little hooks for the general public, tequila. I don't think this video is going to work, but that's good because I have to get through stuff really fast. So, on this film, I was trying to track the bats across Mexico, and I had 6 months to do it, and it was my first feature for the BBC, and 3 months in we hadn't found any lesser long-nosed bats at all, and this was an absolute nightmare, and I was sitting outside caves, tearing my hair out, writing alternative scripts for the joy of Mexican bats, because we'd found 24 other species, but not the one the film was about, not the tequila bats. And just at the end, fortunately we kept filming all these failures, and in the edit, my editor said, "Tommy babes, that's the story. The story is it going wrong." And Sabrina, who is an incredible storyteller, she's right. That I thought, oh no, if I make a plan and it doesn't go to plan, it has failed. And often I would miss moments because I'm like, well, it's not in my plan, I better not record this. How often have you been out in nature, responding to a stranding, doing something, and what you've recorded, whether it's scientifically or photographically, is not what you've gone home and told your family about afterwards. What you go home and tell your family about afterwards is the story. That's the thing that you know intuitively connects. Just because you weren't there to get it when you went out doesn't mean that that story hasn't been given to you. You need to be nimble, because whatever you naturally want to connect with other people, what is actually happening, that is the story. We made a film in Australia about kangaroo anatomy. We've designed a camera to film inside the pouch of a habituated, rehabilitated kangaroo, Ella, who couldn't go back to the wild. You gave Ella a carrot, she gave you the length of time it took to eat a carrot to look in her pouch. We filmed the first ever sort of semi-wild kangaroo birth as her jelly bean, this big, climbed up the outside and inside. We filmed inside the pouch, and we filmed the developing Joey. We filmed loads of biology and behavior that no one had ever seen, but what did people remember? The sexy man who hand-reared the kangaroos. This is Brolga. Brolga is 6'7". He lived in a shed by himself. He didn't have a shower. He had one gas hob and one frying pan, which he never washed. After our film came out, he got thousands of marriage proposals from women across the world, but his sanctuary got loads of money. He now lives in a real house with a real wife. But people learned loads about the biology. This was commissioned and changed from the first ever one-part natural world into the first ever two-parter natural world. And there is so much biology in this film, but you would never know it. And there's so much in Australia. People don't like kangaroos, a lot of them. They have bits of their cars specifically designed to make sure they don't interrupt their journeys when they drive through them. Some people think of them as pests. And in Australia, this really was helpful in changing many people's points of view about their indigenous mammals. And I think the quote that I love is this Ian Forster quote, super famous: only connect the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted, and human love will be seen at its height. We deal mostly in science communication, or if you would, in that world, with prose, with themes, trends, contexts. Where is the passion? When you connect the two together, they bind to people's brains. That's how humans absorb prose and passion. And I think love is the most powerful way of bringing that about in people. And that is cheesy, but it's true, I think. And I also think that storytelling is like ecology. All the time you'll be in talks about impact in storytelling, and the same case comes up every time. It's Blue Planet 2. Wow, they invented the story of ocean plastic. It made such a difference. It was a massive show. It had a huge impact. But why wasn't it in Blue Planet 1? Right? There was ocean plastic during Blue Planet 1. The filmmakers encountered plastic in Blue Planet 1. Why was it edited around in Blue Planet 1 and centered in Blue Planet 2? The context had changed. Instagram, you couldn't move for seeing sea turtles with Q-tips up their nostrils. The community, the place that those stories landed had changed. The ecological context had changed. You can have keystone species, massive things like Blue Planet 2, but they rely on an ecosystem of other stories and other storytellers paving the way. Communities, people having conversations in pub, people sharing photographs with each other, local radio. You don't have to be the obvious thing that everyone remembers to have impact. And in order for those big obvious things that everybody remembers to have impact, all the other members of the story community, ecosystem community, have to function too. And so this talk is about kind of thinking about storytelling as ecology. And that's what my hope is today. But I'm very sorry, because this metaphor is going to get extremely stretched and then gradually just break down entirely by the end. How am I doing? Okay, so this is George Monbiot. I went to go see George Monbiot because I was working at the BBC. I was really stressed. I couldn't tell all the nature conservation stories I wanted to. He was like, yeah, obviously. And I was like, oh, I thought I'd meet him in a cafe and he would just, explain, there would be some sort of revelation to him. And he said, yeah, obviously, I've got a cool story that no one cares about. It's about natural climate solutions. This was in 2018 or 2019. All the talks in the climate talks were about energy. What's our energy source? What's our energy mix? How do we solve the climate crisis? And it was all about tech. And he was like, we want to get nature conservation into these conversations. We want to, in the climate negotiations, make sure nature has a kind of seat at the table, and that people realize the damage that's done to our chances of surviving the climate crisis if we also damage the nature as well. This was before climate and nature were talked about in one sentence. It was just climate change, and occasionally the biodiversity crisis would have a feeble wave in the background. So I thought, that's a cool story. That's really interesting. It's really upbeat. It's a solutions-based thing. And he made a video about it, an animation, and it had been watched by 5,000 people. So I thought, why isn't it hitting home? I was working with, this is Roger Payne, making a feature doc with Roger, who sadly died last year, and he, because all these projects, they run overlapping with each other, and they're all intermingling. When your films and your books or whatever come out, they come out as these discrete entities that look like they stand alone, but they're all interacting with each other in your brain, in their gestation along the way. And the people from one film or book influence the people and your decisions in the next. Roger said, I hate to tell you, Tom, but no one's going to watch this film if it's only got George Monbiot in it. I think you should get Greta Thunberg. And I was like, oh God, that sounds terrifying. how? And he was like, she's the Joan of Arc of this movement. She is someone people will listen to this from. And Greta had signed George's petition, and Greta had actually written about this for putting nature in the climate debate. So George sent her a tweet, and she took...
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
But you get the idea. And this film went out. It was seen by 80 million people. We didn't have a broadcaster. I got £14,000 of funding to pay for the cost of production afterwards. We got that from 3 charities. Each charity wanted to put it just on their YouTube channel. But we said, no, let's put it out as a Creative Commons film. Let it just kind of disperse by itself. So we gave it away to anybody who was going to have it. This was against everything they wanted to do with impact. They wanted to measure the impact, put it on one channel, aggregate the views, make sure it all goes through one place. But the place that it was most seen was not Conservation International's channel, it wasn't Greenpeace's channel, it was the composer who let us use his music for free, Roan. He put it on his Facebook page. It was picked up by an Australian comedian, and it was seen there 21 million times, randomly on his Facebook page. This was us sort of just seeing where it would naturally flow. You can't do this anymore. Organic kind of distribution doesn't work on Facebook and Instagram like that anymore because you have to play the game of the algorithms and pay. But back then, it blew our minds. But why did it travel so far? Why did people care about it and want to share it with each other? We wore our heart on our sleeve. We went to film with Greta on a very long-winded, no-flying route. We used all-electric sort of kit. We tried to make the film itself a recyclable. I mean, if your film is seen 80 million times, it's going to have a big footprint anyway, right? As 80 million streams. But other people took it and reused it, and we knew it was working when I got an email from a private jet company asking if they could use it in their promotional materials, but just cut out the bit about oil and gas being the problem. And what you might notice also is that some of these things are quite familiar, and you feel the conversation has already moved on. It's a consistently dynamic system, storytelling and having impact. And you know you've had impact when what you've made looks dated because other people take it and they do it too. This editing technique, having them leaning forwards, these all came from music videos and music video animators that I had wanted to work with for ages, but the BBC thought were too fast cut and too shocking. But I knew I liked them, so I'd saved up all those frustrations and I put them into this weird little little film. But the thing that I think people really liked about this, because it went out at Climate Week, we got people from the UN Forest team saying, thank you, this has changed how we are able to have our negotiations, because it's a kind of little bite-sized thing that lots of people have watched, and it becomes a talking point, and they were able to get more Amazonian protection, for example, in discussions where this was referenced. I made like 3 more films with Greta Thunberg. None of them ever did this well. Why? Well, one, luck. The day it came out was the day that her name, the day before she marched in New York in 2019 when she'd taken the boat across, that her name was the most Googled name in the world ahead of Donald Trump. And that graph is like Donald Trump up here and Greta Thunberg goes like that and then down again. It came out on that day. We couldn't have planned it. The other thing is that she's really nice in it, right? She's leaning forward, she's smiling. Do you know why Greta's smiling in this? She's laughing at my stupid script. She thought saying pretty cool right was the most boring thing you could do. And she's like, you're an idiot. But I'm a director and I could take it and make it seem sincere. So we did that. And people said, oh, it's really great to see her smiling and being friendly. Because I knew Greta, I knew George. They're nice people. They like other people. They were friends. And I just wanted to show that connection, that thing that I mentioned to my wife when I got home. You know, they're really nice. They're not scary. I wanted to put that on the screen. And I try and do that with researchers too. So then because researchers are always in lab coats doing weird stuff down microscopes, and so when I make films about scientists, I try and show their dogs, what kind of ice cream flavors they like, how they have arguments in their relationships, anything to get the connection so they don't seem different, so you want to listen to what's going on in their lives. Then this happened to me. I'm watching to see who's laughing. All right, so I was accidentally in a viral video myself, which I did not enjoy. I don't recommend being in a viral video, even if it's for something as nice as almost dying in a dramatic natural explosion. But I lost my shoes, my dignity, everything. But I thought, suddenly I have one of the ingredients of storytelling, which is people's attention being drawn towards something they're already engaged by. So I was in a different part of the process of storytelling. And I thought, how can I turn this into something useful? So I went to Monterey Bay and I made a natural world, and I tried to take all the attention about the spectacular pratfall that I've been involved in and turn it towards people who disentangle whales, who spend their lives watching whales, who put D-tags on their back to uncover the impact of vessel traffic and ocean noise on them. There's Ted Cheeseman, who invented Happy Whale, disentanglers like Peter Falkens, and try to take this in attention and in a documentary transfer it to people. But again, through their lives. You got to know Ted's dog. You got to see Pete's art. You got to see Joy eating countless sandwiches in disgusting dissection environments. And you got to see Ari's phallic cactus. These things make these people real. And I think, ultimately, and I tried to copy Robert Altman, who is a film director whose films I love, and he makes films about communities and how they interlink. And this was what I tried to do with this. I tried to show how a whale can have be a vision into an interlinked community. And you all know about that. That's what you're part of. And the other impact thing I tried to do with this film is change the internal workings of the BBC. So please don't take a photograph of this. No, genuinely. I'm allowed to share this, but it can't be sent out. This is the carbon footprint of various BBC films. So, so there's roughly 2 kinds. These are BBC Natural World, so 1 hour films, and you can see the big carbon footprint ones and the smaller ones. And in general, the smaller ones are ones that are made from archived material. So that's like pre-existing footage that you recycle and reuse. And then the bigger ones are ones where you've got to travel around, fly in airplanes, taking big heavy bits of kit, eating loads of food, renting accommodation, washing clothes, that kind of stuff. Well, this was our one. We did it on location, but we brought it in with a carbon budget of about the same as reusing existing materials. And we did that by essentially using our own team network. The cameraman, he was like, maybe we could use lighter boxes and leave the kits on location. Cherry, our production manager, she said, let's go to paperless delivery. We were just one little film, but all the different production companies in Bristol wanted our business because they always want everybody's business. And we said, okay, we'll do our final post, we'll do our sound mixing, we'll do our grading and editing with you. If you have a green memo and if you show us how you are going to change the footprint of your company. They were obviously, like, all of them were really on board with this already and they wanted to do it. Our little, like, yeah, we'll give you our contract nudge meant that loads of them just did it who hadn't done it before. So now the BBC has paperless deliveries. You see this certificate there, Albert Sustainable Production Certificate. You'll see it at the end of Traitors and other shows. Albert is the industry way of trying to lower the footprint of TV production. So that was another way that we tried to have impact. You'll never see that impact. That's not an impact that is a storytelling impact. It's an internal behind-the-scenes impact. But probably that was the most impact that we were able to generate because loads of other production companies and the associated companies and the internal BBC changed their working methods. And that is a discrete environmental win. And I also then wrote a book about what Ted told me about, which was this use of AI to identify whales. So, and that took me like 3 or 4 years, plus like years sort of trying to share it with people, doing talks. This took me 3 months, so 80-odd million people, 3 months. This took me like maybe 5, 6 years. Read by like tens of thousands of people, I don't know, like orders and orders and orders and orders of magnitude different numbers of people. I don't know which had the most impact because I have had more letters and communications to people who've read the book. I've had people who have started new jobs or have done PhDs. Is that just because my name's on the bottom and it's Greta and George on the front of that? I think it's always impossible to know what has had most impact, and eyeballs are a terrible metric, and different kinds of attention generate different kinds of impact, and I think trying to measure it is, in a way, the worst use of your time because you cannot know. But if you know that you're connecting, if you know it still moves you, the work, when you see it again, you know that's a really good barometer for how much it's going to affect people in ways that are ultimately impossible to measure. My fonts were so much nicer yesterday, but a lot of stories have no impact on the world around you, but they always impact you. So many of the failures that I've been involved in have been repurposed in the next things I've made, and those are other impacts. So questions for you today, as you circulate, as you tell each other stories, as you talk about what's happening in your communities, you consider how is that going to reach people outside of those communities with conservation benefits or other impact benefits. Think about it. Oh, goodness, I'm looking at this slide, my beautiful fonts. Oh. These are all stories. Hands up if you know the story of Pelorus Jack. Top left. Pelorus Jack is a Rousseau's dolphin who hung around in New Zealand 100 years ago and guided individual boats across a very dangerous bit of water. The boats would line up in turn, and this dolphin went back and forth, taking them in for 20 years. Why? Who was this dolphin? How did the people know about it? Who knows about orcas carrying dead calves around? Hands up. Great. Who knows about robbing grey whales' tongues in Baja? Great. Who knows about Porphyrius, the tyrant whale of Justinian Constantinople? Yes! Yes! Okay. Now you all do. Porphyrius was a terrorist whale that sunk loads of the Emperor Justinian's trireme, or I don't know what the hell they were sailing, big boats, and he got his best general on a special mission to try and kill the whale. They failed, the whale just died by itself, but not before sinking loads of vessels. Why? Why did that one sink them and that one help them? Why? What's going on with these Gibraltar orcas? Everyone knows about it. What's happening with that lady on her dolphin watching? Maybe we don't want to know. And then you've got the sperm whales with this, is it a bottlenose dolphin that they have adopted, who knows? These are stories, right? You look at each image, you want to know more, you want to tell people about it, you probably already know something. They are not context, they are not what you need people to know. If you are trying to get impact, so many conversations, you'll be like, okay, what are people going to do at the end? How are we going to make them do it? How are we going to give them this information that we think is important? That's not storytelling. That's context. That's information. Storytelling is stories. So if you encounter a story, be alert to it. It has these kinds of ingredients. Individuals doing things, mystery, crisis, connection, and ultimately you remember it and you want to tell other people about it. Okay. Oh, my fonts. Okay. So and then you should think, how does my story fit into the story into the story ecosystem? What levels of knowledge are we connecting between when we're telling this story? Okay. When I came here today, I thought, what do you already know? What do you already care about? Where are you going to be going afterwards? And it's at the beginning of the day. This hopefully can help frame the kinds of things you think about and do for the rest of the day. There are loads of different kinds of ways to be a cetacean. You fit into loads of different ecological niches. Think about which ones suit you best. Not everybody has to be to do the same kind of storytelling. A lot of these conversations I've been involved in is a sort of what is the ultimate guide to always getting impact? What's the magic formula? No, it's an ecology. There are niches. It's the specialisms. In my company, this is where we've got two gripping films. We are weirdos who try new things, right? And with my colleagues, Alex and Evie, we came up with this thing called the Magic Triangle. And what we like to do is, we like to make films, and we're starting out, we're like, okay, let's have these three ingredients. Fulfilling process with people you love. You can hate them sometimes, that's okay, but ultimately you need to end up kind of loving them. That's because you're working with them, that's your life together. And then good chance of being useful and impact at the beginning, knowing at the beginning, how's this going to go? If you were hand-raising rare parrots, if someone says, what are you going to do when it's fledged? You're like, well, just throw it in the sea? No! You soft release it, you give it what it needs, you think about the environment it's going out into, who will be receptive, will it thrive? You can't control that, but you can predict it. And pushing state-of-the-art and inventing stuff, that's what we really like. That's our kind of particular thing. And that's what we like to do. If you just try and do new stuff and you really want it to work, then you burn out. It's terrible. It's unfulfilling. If you work with people that you love and you think it's going to be useful, it might just be boring and the same as other things. So for us, we do want to do that. That's fine. And if you do fulfilling things with people you love and you push the state-of-the-art, it might be fun and innovative, but maybe it won't do anything. So we just try and do stuff here. And at the beginning, your personal version of this is quite useful when you talk to your colleagues when you're beginning on this process of making a story have some impact, because it's a team process. It's about your relationships. And I like to think that we're like killer whales, not because we have bad fonts, but because we balance innovation and conservatism. I was talking to Luke Rendell yesterday. I'm really interested in the process that has led to killer whales having multiple totally different foraging strategies, but ultimately copying each other all the time. What is the balance in a social learning animal between conservatism, like the success of the social learner, which is copying other things that work, but in a dynamic, changing environment, taking opportunities and exploring and changing things, innovation. So, in filmmaking and storytelling, it's what things have inspired me that I think are going to work again in this context, but what new things would I like to try? And the balance of these is ultimately how successful it is. If it's so new and weird that no one even knows what they're watching, they're going to be alienated. If it's exactly the same as everything that's worked before, it probably won't work as well. And so that's where we try and fit into that storytelling ecosystem. So, who do you want to make it with? This is my friend George Woodcock. He's my cameraman. We were having such a bad time on the top of this Mayan temple. He gave me a nice hug. When I think about all the things I've made, I don't think about the things that were talked about in the introduction to this, or the productions. I think about all the different people I've made it with. That's ultimately what sustains you. Your career is a career built of other people and relationships. You have a shorthand of the papers, the films, the stuff that it's like the rest of the world knows about. And so each different production is flavoured by the different groups of people who you make it with. And you can persuade yourself, you can use logic and strategy to make the different world different with the story. I found all the things that I like doing. Podcast, this is the film with Professor Parker Descriptor, it was in New York Times Op Doc. That's John Kerry with me and Ed Goodall at COP28. This is my editor show for my book, and that's Kerry, my agent. Like, these things we've made, I can sense all of them within. And I know the ones that are good, and I trace back the roots of our relationships into what has been good in those processes. Yeah. This is Jane Campion, the director of The Power of the Dog. I went to go see a Q&A with her at the BFI. She had just won an Oscar for it. Jane Campion is my hero, and that's her producer, Tanya Saghetchian. And she said, creative projects are opportunities to spend time with people you love and admire. Somebody in the audience, did one of these classic questions. Jane, just wanted to say, I'm a huge fan, loved all these films, listed all the films. I really thought in this one you were progressing the art form, and I appreciated your use of the blah, blah, blah. This person's question statement went on for hours. At the end, they said, so what was your inspiration for the film, Jane? What led you to this point? And she was like, I just wanted to see Tanya. And Jane was living in the States, Tanya was living in Australia. She was like, yeah, I like the story, but I just thought we could hang out. It was an excuse to hang out. She won an Oscar. It's an incredible film. And the other thing that she said that I've tried to remember the whole time is, your mind will persuade you of anything, trust your body. And so many of the conflicts and problems I've got in filmmaking and storytelling have been when my body has been going like, not so sure, and the mind has been like, yeah, but maybe it'll be useful for this. But the body is really useful to storytelling because we are intuitive in how we interpret stories. So if your body is intuitively not happy in the making of the story, that will come through too. So here's all the notes for this. Stories flow along channels of rare connection and emotion. To capture these requires being open to notice them and being ready to record them. To craft this, and it's a craft, an apprenticeship, you get better as you go, into impact requires artistry, cooperation, and consideration of the niche that it's going to go into. So think, as you encounter stories, how will you give it a chance to flourish and thrive? How will it be seen as you release it? If someone then sees it, remember, you're not pushing a story into a world. It's not binary, no story, story. You're connecting it in a web of relationships that it's going to continue to move through and influence. If someone sees it, if they read it, if it connects, what will they do? How will it and could it flow onwards? And be aware that most of it is just mad luck. I interviewed David Attenborough. I said, how do you know? Do you ever know when something good is going to come of what you've made? He said, never. Even when he's finished the film, he doesn't know what's going to land and what's not, because in this ecology, it's a dynamic world that we release our stories into, and it's not up to us whether they thrive or not. If you are a control freak, it's not for you. If you love chaos and you're intrigued by it, it's great. Here's John Kerry. This is this sound art piece we took to COP28, and Ed will talk about this later. John Kerry sat through so many talks and things. He came to Rachel Carson was the first person to play whale sounds to anybody in 1951. Since then, there's been a long tradition of playing the recordings of whales' voices to people in communal settings, and Roger Payne, obviously, and Katie Payne were a big part of this. But this is a tradition that we do all over the place, and there's something about doing it in groups together with big speakers that is incredibly moving for people, that allows different conversations to take place. And we took it to COP28 with WDC to represent the lives of whales and dolphins in conversations where their futures would be determined, to advocate on their behalf, not just because they are important parts of the climate system themselves, but because they're sentient beings with stake in it. John Kerry arrived late, and we had a seat for him. We thought he might come. And we did this to school children, hundreds of school children, delegates, heads of business. We did lots of these. And I saw him at the back, so I ran across the beach. I was like, John Kerry, over here. And the two guys, you see these two guys here and here? They did this. Like that. They were his minders. They almost killed me. Well, I exaggerate, but I'm a storyteller, it's okay. So, but I realized that was going on. They thought I was rushing him, but I was panicking. I don't know what impact this has had, but it's a new form of storytelling in a new place, and it's been a really beautiful thing to be part of. And I'll end now, before I play this little video. It all comes down to trust. Cleaner, shrimp, inside, who knows what kind of fish this is? Nobody? Great, I'm going to lie. This wrasse? I don't know. Cleaner fish, inside fish that come over to it. They don't know what role they're fulfilling in the ecosystem. They have no concept of their impact. But, and shrimp and fish, the cleaners, some of them are visited 5 times a minute by fish. Some fish, are attracted and aggregate around reefs only when these cleaner services are there. Whole coral systems grow, systems visible from space, whole ecologies depend upon this relationship. This relationship is based on trust. Ultimately, telling stories is about trust. It's not about imposing things, it's about empathizing with people, being trusted by them, and trusting other people to share their stories and trusting your team to do it with you. And so the film I'd like to end on is, I think, a good example of that, or at least I love it. We made a film for Service Against Sewage. They wanted to make a film for the G7, and originally it was like they wanted to do a sort of campaign film where it was like, here are our core messages, we've got the G7 meeting, here's what we want them to decide about at the end. How do we get that into a film? And we were going to have a bucket of water, and it was going to be in a meeting, and it was going to have a seat at the table, and it was going to be kind of a comedy, and I realized it was a really bad idea, and not really I didn't know how to do it. And then we realized that there's so much trust and goodwill for Surfers Against Sewage, and they have a community network around the whole country. What if we wrote a love letter to the ocean from the perspectives of all of the different UK ocean users, engagers? And I watched this music video by a band called Bicep, and it was a nostalgic film about the rave scene in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was made of shots of places where raves had happened and YouTube comments about the raves, and it is such a beautiful film. And I thought, maybe we can do that with the ocean. And so we put a call out. We had no money. We even edited it in the Falmouth University Media Centre outside of teaching hours. And we were given footage from all over the country. Maybe some of the people in the room here gave us, I don't know if the guys who did the orca footage. And we got quotes from different people on Twitter, and we just made a film that tried to represent all the connections that other different people have to the ocean. If you watch it, you'll see there's actually messaging in it, and you will absorb that messaging. But I love this film, and I didn't shoot anything for it, and I just think it really does connect, and it has had a life totally outside of that meeting and keeps being given on and given on and given on. So I'd like to end with that today, and I'm sorry I went over, Alice, but I'm first, so I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. I don't think anybody will remember the fonts. They will just remember such a wonderful bespoke talk, so thank you. Next, I'm going to welcome to the stage Andrew from SMASS with his colleague Rachel and Ellie.
Hey everyone. So normally this is the point where we give you the trigger warning, time for the death and destruction and pathology part of it, but thank you to Tom for putting Joy's stuff up and also that utterly inspiring talk to start with. So we're going to do something a little bit different in this talk because we wanted to talk to you a bit about bycatch and entanglement, and particularly what's going on, particularly in Scotland at the moment and within SMASS and within other groups. So I'm going to talk for a bit, and then Rachel and Ellie are going to talk as well. Rachel Lennon is one of our PhD students, is doing some interesting work on bycatch. Ellie runs the Scottish Entanglement Alliance, as you know, is also doing a PhD, and really doesn't want you to know that it's her birthday today, so please don't tell anyone. Okay, so basically what is bycatch entanglement? So this is the definition of it, right? It's the unintended capture of non-target species during fishing practices, particularly the bycatch of endangered, threatened or protected species. And that can mean simply just collecting the wrong fish, catching the wrong fish that doesn't fit with your quota, but specifically for both our concerns, and for this talk it's about the capture of things such as marine mammals, birds, turtles, sharks, skates and rays. And these are significant because these animals have a long lifespan. They reproduce very slowly by taking them out of the ecosystem, and because of where they fit in the ecosystem in the sense of their apex predators, provide great ecosystem services, you can cause massive problems with that for biodiversity. It's also, as we're sadly going to kind of learn, is a massive problem for animal welfare. The process of bycatch, the process of entanglement is brutal and aggressive, and these animals die in extremis and pain and suffering, and it's not pleasant, but unfortunately it's the state of where things are. The process of this is also significant for the fishers. There isn't a single fisher out there that is trying to catch these animals. That's really important. And the economic impact in terms of lost time, in terms of reputation, in terms of the problems that this causes is significant. We're trying to kind of do things about that. Food insecurity is a big problem at the moment, and obviously the effects on an ecosystem-wide effect of bycatch can make food insecurity more prominent, and it also undermines all the initiatives that we've all signed up to, both as individual countries and collectively, to try and tread slightly softer on this planet as we go forward. So this is the definition of it. It's a global conservation and fisheries management issue. It happens around all of the planet. It's not just in Scotland, but it is seen as the single most serious direct threat to cetaceans and the greatest welfare concern. Globally, it's estimated about 300,000 cetaceans alone are caught and killed in bycatch. This is a quote from the International Whaling Commission's recent scientific committee, and we're very, very pleased to have Lindsay Porter, who's chair of the scientific committee, who's here today, who will tell us a lot more about what the IWC are doing in general, and potentially also on that as well. So we've got some data from 32 years worth of stranding surveillance. This is amalgamating England and Wales, E&W, and also the work that we've done from SMASS, looking at why things die. What are the reasons that from taking animals and doing post-mortems from them, what have we found? And generally, there's like infectious disease, that's between 11 and 20%. Sympatric trauma, being beaten up by bottlenose dolphins and eaten by seals, that's slightly higher in Scotland. We've got slightly more angry bottlenose dolphins up here, but it's again between 11 and 15%. Live stranding, mass stranding and live strandings, we get slightly higher numbers up in Scotland as well because of the species that we have and the beaches that we have and the navigation capabilities of long-fin pilot whales, which, as we talked about last year, could be better. And starvation, hypothermia, those are also issues as well. Two at the bottom, chemical pollution, underwater noise. No idea. Very hard to pick up on necropsies. We really don't know about the impact of underwater noise. Chemical pollution directly not sure again, but the paper that is referenced at the bottom, and I'll put a QR code in the end that shows you the links to these. The recent paper by Rosie Williams, nearly half of all the cases that we looked at and did contaminant burden analysis on, they were exceeded the level of contaminants that are considered to be safe. Anyway, that's not this talk, that's a different talk, but there we go. Bycatch in relation to this, okay, it is 21%. It's the biggest single diagnosed cause of death that we have UK-wide, but there is structure to that. So this map on the left shows the bycatch cases, and the one on the right are the entanglement cases, right? And as you can see, the hotspots for bycatch are definitely not really in Scotland. They're down in the southwest. That's partly because of intersection between, that's where a lot of the close to shore fisheries happen, and also because of the prevailing winds and tides that move these bycaught animals onto the beach. As you're probably aware, this is part of the population of common dolphin bycatch that impact both the southwest of England, but also the Bay of Biscay in France, where literally thousands of these common dolphins can strand each year due to impact with fisheries, and that's a process that's being worked on. In Scotland, however, we have that's where we have most of our entanglement cases. There's only 11% of the bycatch cases that happen within the UK have happened in Scotland, but over 90% of the entanglement cases are up here. So that's really how things are split. How do we know this? Well, this is the pathology. This is how we diagnose cases at bycatch. There are things that you can look at externally from just looking at the animal. Essentially, you're looking for the effects of trauma and interaction with fisheries, and so obviously it's things like net marks, rope marks, fresh abrasions or lacerations that have been put on the animal that weren't part of the stranding process, encircling marks on the animal from where they've had their head or part of their body caught into a net, and sometimes that causes pretty grim lesions, either directly or because they're cut out of the net. So we end up with this, just the body being thrown over the side of the vessel, and then it comes in with lacerations or cuts or amputations or what in it. If you are able to take these animals to necropsy, which we're not able to do in a lot of cases, then there's other things that we can look at as well. The process of them dying is essentially one of hypoxia and asphyxiation. So you're looking for things like pulmonary edema and congestion. You're looking for muscle trauma. They often have been very healthy up to the point to which they were bycaught, so they've often been recently feeding. So if you see food in the stomach, that's an indication. These initial sort of marks haven't changed much since Thijs Kloeken put this together nearly 30 years ago. So over 30 years ago, actually. So we're still kind of working on the development from this, and we're not there yet, but we are getting there. I'm going to show you an example of one particular case. So this was a Risso's dolphin that stranded in Fraserburgh, and what you can't see from this slide is just how damn cold and windy it was. The wind was blowing off the sea, and we were all basically exfoliated by the time we went back. I was about 5 years younger from this. So this is an animal that's on this beach. It is incredibly good body condition, and you can tell just from externally, there's two things on this that you might notice that should flag up, this is possibly a bycatch case. This is one. We've got the bubbles in the eye. That only happens if the animal has died whilst it's at depth. So that's a really good indication. The other is this mark on the lower jaw, this linear mark. This is what we're looking for. You can also see the other marks on the animal. So this flow chart here, this is a sort of a flag to some work that's been done by Mark Vessels. He's a pathologist that we've worked with, and he's put together this most amazing, very difficult, quite grim reading, sort of pathway to death, as he calls it, which is this process of what happens. But this is what happens. They become entrapped, they run out of air, they asphyxiate, that causes physiological collapse, and that brings about death. They don't inhale water because, as you probably are aware, they're so good at controlling their respiratory function that it's not like if we were held underwater where they inhale water, they just simply run out of oxygen, and that's the signs that you're looking for. These marks on the animal that you can see, if you do a cross-section of them like this, you can see that little bit of bruising there. That shows that these animals that this mark was put on whilst it was still alive, because dead things don't bruise. These are the lungs, and apologies again for these slightly grim photos, but you can see at the top here all those bubbles, the kind of bubble wrap approach of it. That's due to this hypoxia asphyxiation, and the congestion that you see at the bottom is a function of the physiological collapse. If you can read these signs, these are showing you quite clearly that this is potentially a bycatch case. You also have the lungs and the trachea that has got stable foam in it as a result of the loss of surfactant in these animals in the lungs, and that again is a close-up of the stable foam further down in the airways. And finally, in this case, we saw that this is the stomach that's entirely full of squid, which we packed up, not for lunch, just for sampling. So that's the suite of cases where we're pretty certain this is a bycatch case. This is the portfolio of things. But the thing that's worth putting that we have to bear in mind is there is not a single diagnostic test that we can do, a swab that we can take, an analysis that we can run that definitively tells us that this is bycatch. It has to be a suite of different things that we put together. We put them together and we have a basis of what we actually think might be likely. And that's a problem because we can't always get these cases post-mortem. And it's a problem for understanding the level of bycatch, but it's also a problem for understanding the issues of entanglement. So I'm going to pass over to Rachel and Ellie, who are going to talk to you about the bycatch project that we've got going on and also the entanglement one. I'll be back in a minute.
Thank you. So as Andrew said, there isn't much bycatch that happens in Scotland. You can see this in this map made by Helen Chadwick at the University of Exeter. We only really have a few instances of bycatch in Scotland. Really, there's 107 examples of diagnosed bycatch in the whole 30 years of the SMASS database. And when you compare that to places like France or Denmark or Norway, where they're getting thousands of bycaught animals every single month, 107 in 30 years doesn't seem like a lot at all. So you might think that we don't have much of a bycatch problem in Scotland. But then the question becomes, is that the true number? Is the evidence that we have really reflective of what's happening in the ocean? And when we start to look at trends and strandings in general, we can start to answer that question a little bit more. So common dolphin stranding in Scotland tends to happen in the winter months and in the west coast. But typically, most of those strandings have no diagnosis or no cause of death because it's the winter, it's the west coast of Scotland. It's really difficult to get to those carcasses for logistic reasons, or a lot of the time they're decomposed, so SMASS can't actually conduct a post-mortem on it. So most of those are unknown cases. But again, when we look at areas in the Northeast Atlantic, they also have peaks in the winter, but a lot of those cases are bycatch cases. So potentially a lot of our unknowns might be bycatch. And when we also look at fishing effort, so this graph in the middle there, we also see an increase in fishing effort in the same time and space that we're seeing those increases in common dolphin strandings. And correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it's at least a relationship that we want to explore and understand a little bit better. Could there be some correlation between those two events? And that's where BEEP comes in. So BEEP is the Bycatch Evidence Evaluation Protocol. It was originally developed by the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and is used down in Cornwall by the Strandings team. And essentially it aims to improve bycatch estimations when postmortems aren't possible. And so we've been running a BEEP trial in SMASS for the past 5 months or so, and it's ongoing until the end of March. Thank you to any BEEPers in the audience. I know there's some of you. And essentially we've asked 30 different SMASS volunteers to take a specific and detailed set of photos, the photos that you can see on the slide there, of any carcass that they go out to. And this means that we can get every single angle of that individual and we can look for specific features of bycatch. Andrew's already talked about a few of them, but it's those encircling lines, it's the gas bubbles in the eye, it's lip cuts, these 13 key features that we're looking for that veterinary pathologists have identified as important for indicating bycatch. And then we look at the presence and absence of those features, and we can make an assessment of the likelihood that that animal was bycaught. And it's on a scale because it has to be multiple of these features, and depending on how many there are, kind of dictates how certain we are that it is bycatch. And this is still an ongoing project, but the preliminary findings of BEEP are that we've managed to assess 91 different animals, and 7 of those have been identified as potential bycatch cases. And all 7 of those wouldn't have gone for post-mortem by SMASS, so they would have potentially gone undetected as bycatch cases. And that in itself is really providing us evidence that we need to enhance our monitoring approaches for bycatch, particularly in remote areas where postmortems aren't happening, because we might be missing a lot of bycatch that's happening in Scotland. And if we improve our evidence of bycatch, then we can guide our conservation efforts to make sure that they're targeted to the species and the area where the problem is, and we can start to mitigate it. I just want to say a quick thank you to the beepers that have helped with this. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. And for the rest of you involved with SMASS, keep an eye out, because beep may be going SMASS-wide in the future. I'm going to pass over to Ellie now, who's going to talk a little bit more about entanglement and the problem and solutions with entanglement.
Okay, so I'm just going to rattle through this really quickly because there are a few things scarier than Marielle and her air horn. I'm just going to run through what we know about entanglement in Scottish waters, the type of data that's required to understand entanglement risk, the difficulties in collecting this, and the role that everyone in this room plays in collecting, interpreting, and communicating this, and how that then progresses through to becoming evidence that can be used to lobby for policy change and better mitigation. So this slide is just a series of images of entanglements that are held within the SMASS database, and this is just to highlight the number of species that are affected, the number of gear types and materials that are involved. And these came from a range of sources report-wise, so from SMASS volunteers, member of the public, some of our Entanglement Alliance partner organisations like the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust and British Divers Marine Life Rescue, and also from fishermen as well. So the entanglement problem in Scotland, this is a data deficient area of research. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen and isn't something to worry about. And in fact, we know from the first phase of work that the Scottish Entanglement Alliance conducted, which involved a lot of interviews with fishermen, is that there is a significant underreporting of entanglements in Scotland, and that is a real issue. That piece of work also highlighted that more species are affected by this than we previously knew about. But there is also a huge motivation and will from within the fishing industry to try and address this. And if you want to know more, you can find all those reports on our website. So what we do know is the SMASS database holds 160-ish entanglement records. So 118 of those involve mysticetes, so that's our baleen whales. That number maybe sounds quite low, but half of those have occurred in the last 6 years. Actually, 6 of those have occurred in the last 10 weeks. So we had a minke whale just before Christmas, and we've had 5 humpback whales since Boxing Day. And also some of the BDMLR guys who were scheduled to be here are not, because they are dealing with a 7th, not a baleen whale, but a sperm whale up on Skye. So that's why they're not here today. Is this the start of a new trend? I hope not. But we do know that over the last decade or so, entanglement rates do seem to be increasing. So that's what this kind of shows here. So the graph there and the map, thank you Rachel for putting these together. The arrow just highlights when the Scottish Entanglement Alliance was born. So 2018 we started, but you can see the general trend. Obviously there's a dip when COVID happened and a lot of fishermen weren't fishing, a lot of people weren't going out, so there was a dip in reports. That doesn't necessarily mean entanglements weren't still happening, but we just didn't hear about them. And then the map here just highlights that entanglement is something that happens coast-wide. And it also highlights the importance of having this network of citizen scientists, fishermen, other people who are reporting these strandings into us. It gives us a much fuller picture and helps to minimise those data gaps. And that strengthens the evidence base that we can then move forward with to enact conservation change through, for example, policy and implementing better mitigation measures to reduce entanglement risk. So gathering evidence of entanglement, given that this is something that affects our biggest animals, it's an incredibly cryptic issue, and a whole chain of events needs to happen from an animal getting entangled to it forming part of the evidence base that's held by SMASS. So an animal becomes entangled. If it dies, it can sink, and then we've lost that record. It's gone forever. It can float, but if it floats out to sea, again, it's lost forever. If it hits the shore, That's great for us, anyway, obviously not for the animal. But even if it hits the shore, it then still has to be seen. It has to be reported. It has to be documented somehow in terms of photographs, measurements, drone footage. We've had some excellent drone footage recently from Anthony, who's here today. It needs to be accessible or be able to be moved somewhere that is accessible for necropsy and further examination. Can it be necropsied, and then can the cause of death be determined as entanglement? And at that point it makes it into the kind of body of evidence that we have. But there's a lot of points there that this can be lost, so that's why it's kind of a data deficient area of research and why every single record is important. So thank you to everyone who has contributed, either reporting a stranding, going out to document this, and helping in all the other ways that you guys do. So why is this evidence important? So the more data we gather, the more likely and able we are to identify threats, high-risk areas or any hotspots of entanglement, patterns and trends. Like I said, I'm hoping this is just a blip, this kind of horror show that has been 2025 so far in terms of entanglement. It helps to reduce uncertainty and again minimise those data gaps. So when there is little evidence, there's two options. You can either assume that this is because it isn't a problem. We know that's not the case with entanglement. If we do assume it's not a problem, that's detrimental to the animals. At the other end of the scale, we can take a precautionary approach and really take a kind of sledgehammer to crack a nut sort of go in that kind of direction, and that can be really detrimental to fishermen and lead to mitigations that are really just massive overkill. It all helps to improve public knowledge and communication between different stakeholder groups who are affected by and making decisions around this issue. It helps to inform and motivate policymakers and those kind of in charge. And it helps to shape proportional mitigation measures. And I would encourage you all to stick around for Susie and Bally's talk a little bit later, and also this afternoon. Please go and speak to Susie, Bally, Duncan and Hayden, who are all here today, who've been doing some really incredible work testing some mitigations within the fishing sector to reduce entanglement risk. They're doing a phenomenal job. Please buy them a drink. Maybe not Hayden, I think he had enough last night. But before I hand back to Andrew, I just want to say that this is genuinely an area of research where everyone can have an impact and be agents of change for mitigating against this. Andrew mentioned earlier that SMASS investigate a whole range of threats. So some of these are natural, like bottlenose dolphin attack, infectious disease. Some just seem impossibly complex and intractable, like chemical pollution, noise. The sources of these are many and varied. Entanglement has one major cause that we know about, and it's poor fisheries management. This is largely a political issue, and I think that makes it kind of the easiest one of these to solve. And I think although it's a horrendous issue, we should feel really positive that this is one that we can actually figure out within our lifetime. So again, please go and speak to Susie and Bally and crew this afternoon. But I'll hand back to Andrew. Thank you.
Cheers, Ellie. Thanks, Ellie. I'm very aware that I am running over and there's a danger of an air horn that's coming here, so we'll be quite quick on this. So finally, there's a lot of projects that are going on at the moment. Some of you guys are already involved with them. Some of them are being showcased here today, particularly the sinking line trials. There are loads. I mean, it's a situation where if it was easy, it would have been solved already, right? So clearly there's a number of different ones that are put on through governments, through NGOs, through international organisations. There's a sort of we're not short of questions to ask. This is just from pulling their documents together. These are sort of some of the eight kind of themes that seem to be used in terms of bycatch, in terms of better understanding the problem, understanding the potential solutions in terms of pingers or ADD, how monitoring can be used better, how we fill data gaps, what the impacts are in terms of climate change, changing distributions of species, as Andrew spoke about earlier on, in terms of the fact that our changing waters, our changing prey distribution, and moving different animals into areas of potentially more hazard. How policy can be used this, as Ellie says, this is something that is essentially a policy issue. It can be tractable. It's a societal decision that we have this problem. There are loads of others as well. They are harder to fix, but this is one that we could have some traction on it if we were good at putting together the agreements and policies and strengthening the ways at which we can get adherence to those reporting and compliance. they kind of come under these three titles, basically, in terms of monitoring, improving monitoring, being better at the mitigation, and the collaboration. The only way this is ever going to work is through good collaboration between scientists, between fishermen, through the NGO networks. Without that, we cannot possibly hope to do this with a stick. It has to be done with a carrot. And this, if you can see the quotes up here, these are some sort of the quotes that came off our Facebook page when we put up one of these grim pictures of an entangled whale up there. And they are very, very divisive. Social media can be an amazing tool. Clearly it can, but as Tom says, the way that it is being weaponized now in terms of accentuating division and extremism can be quite damaging. So as positive agents of change, it's about trying to sort of address this in a way where you can see that it's complex and it's difficult and it has nuance to it, and that's not something that the algorithms like. They don't like subtlety and nuance. So that's it. There's a QR code there which has got links to some of the papers that we put together, some work that's going on if you want to scan that. These are just the final points. I mean, it is one of the most critical threats. I don't think anyone worries about this, but we have to do something about it, not just because of its environmental necessity, but there's probably a moral imperative to do this because we have levers we could pull to make some change with this. They are more achievable than the other environmental challenges. That doesn't make them easy, but it does make it possible. And the way around this is to have really good, strong, evidence-based policies which can be used to shape this. It's not a one-size-fits-all system that we have. It does require to understand the situations for each particular fisheries, each particular environment, to do it in a way that is sort of effective, robust, and long-term sustainable. And this is where you guys come in. I mean, your involvement is absolutely critical. You know, collecting information about strandings, doing the BEEP project, letting us know about cases that wash up, so we're better at being able to sort of understand this. Being positive advocates for change in terms of this, you can help. And yeah, we'll see where we go with this. So sorry for overrunning. Thank you for your time, and that's us.
Thank you, Andrew and Rachel and Ellie. That was fantastic. And our final speaker for our keynote section is Ed Goodall from WDC. And I will just pass on over to Ed because we're running out of time a little bit.
Oh God, have I unplugged the wrong one?
Hello. I've been sat down there in the front row, and it's quite intimidating getting up here and realising quite how many of you are actually in this room. But thank you so much for coming all the way here. I've actually been invited to speak at the Marine Forum 3 times, and I managed every single time because it's terrifying coming to speak to people who actually know about whales and dolphins. I work at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. I'm our head of intergovernmental engagement, which is a job title that nobody really understands, but it basically means I run our international policy work, trying to create change at different international conventions and agreements. And when I go to those places, it seems like those people should actually understand what we're there to talk about, but much of the time we don't. So I find that really easy because those people don't really get the issues that I'm there to talk to them about, so I can get it across quite easily. But coming here, you all know really far more than I do, and so that's quite a scary concept, but it is a pleasure to be here, and I really hope you'll have a great day, really. So this morning I've been asked to come and talk to you about what does it take to see change in conservation, and thank you so much for giving me that ridiculous question to try and answer this morning, because it's so massive and complex, and it's a question that we all come back to all the time, is how do we actually start to reverse some of these trends? You know, there's bad news all the time, all the graphs we're seeing are plummeting, and it can have such a massive impact on us, but what can we do? What can we do to try and see change? So I'm actually a project manager, a conservation project manager, and everything really when you approach it is a project made up of different steps and different components, and you set an objective at the start, and you need to line up those different steps and components. You need to understand the challenges, and you have to create a plan. Absolutely every single thing that we do is a project, whether it's solving climate change, whether it's trying to tackle a bycatch issue, or even if it's just making a cup of tea. You know the end point that you want to get to, but if you do the steps in the wrong way, then you can end up with a terrible cup of tea or a smashed mug on the floor, or just an absolute disaster. And it doesn't really work out as intended. So, and this question is so large, I just thought I would give it over to our new robotic overlords in ChatGPT and ask them, whatever it is, what were the key steps in creating change in conservation? And it spat out quite an interesting list, which some of them are useful. I'll read out some of them now. I'm going to try and claw back some time because I know that we're very much running over, so I won't go through everything in detail. But the first thing it put, which was the most useful thing, I think, and what we'll all be talking about today, and some of the things that lots of you do all the time, is grounding our work in scientific data and data collection and research and publishing it so that we've got an evidence base to draw from, so that we know where we're coming from, we can understand the drivers and the patterns of how we've got into that state, and then we can figure out the processes of how we reverse those trends. Other things that spat out were collaborative and inclusive approaches, so involving everybody, creating communities, involving all the different stakeholders to build up a body of people who are committed to taking different decisions in different areas so that we can create change. It also spat out things which just weren't really helpful, like address climate change. Thanks, ChatGPT. I'll get on that one tomorrow. Other things like monitor and evaluate and scale up, those are all really important things to do. We need to understand where we've come from. We need to, and impact is a huge thing as well. So working for an NGO, we're reliant on funders all the time. And Tom mentioned this earlier, it's like, how do you actually understand whether you've made an impact? And it's really, really difficult to monitor that, but funders all want to know that at the moment. So we have to find ways, and we have to try and kind of do things to try and understand where people are getting their most bang for their buck if they give us money, and how are we going to do that. Incorporating Indigenous knowledge is very, very important. Indigenous people, so I work internationally, and a lot of the time over many, many years, those people have been left out of the conversations, but they're the people who really, really understand ecosystems and how they fit together, and so bringing them much more centrally into the debate is really, really important. At the Convention of Biological Diversity last year, they created a whole new process where there is now Indigenous communities are brought together to really drive and really be embedded in that whole process, and that's really, really important. So we've got all of those elements to create, and it's about shifting mindsets, and it's about fostering cooperation and using that science to guide action, and finding ways for communities to benefit from conservation efforts that then sustain them into the future. It's a really long-term commitment that requires flexibility and innovation, but with all of these different tools at our disposal, and it's such a complex thing to try and put them in the right order, in the right way, at the right time, with the right people, we're still not seeing that kind of global shift in the trajectory that we want to see. We've got all these grand plans, we've got all these incredible tools, we've got more intelligence, more things than we've ever had to tackle these problems, but we're not really seeing that change. And so something's missing, and it's definitely missing from that list that ChatGPT spat out at me. And I think a lot of the time we're distilling nature down into numbers and words, and we're trying to fix it with a process. And a lot of the time, the people that are making those decisions and they're holding the pen, they're so far removed away from what they're actually trying to do. And you guys, you're the people on the front line, and we work in this area, and we know what needs to be done, but the people making the decisions, they're so far removed and so connected to it. So I was looking at that list that ChatGPT spat out, and I was trying to think, well, what's missing from this list? There's a lot of really useful things in there, and we have to do all of those things. They're really important tools, and we can't forget any of them. But there's one thing that was missing from that list, in my opinion, which is experiences and connection. And if you don't do all of those things that are required as part of a project, no matter what part of it is, if you don't care, then you're never really going to succeed. And so what makes us care? Is it the science? Do we look at the science? Does that make us care? I think probably it does for some of us. Is it monitoring projects? Do we do that because we care? Do we? And I mean, but when we were growing up, when we were thinking about what we wanted to do, I don't think any of us wanted to go into impact monitoring. I don't think any of us expected to do precisely the job that we're doing right now. Maybe some of you did, and that's incredible. And I think we're all really lucky to be working in this area, but we end up finding all different spaghetti kind of paths to end up doing what we're doing now. And I think that's held within an experience that we all had and our own kind of personal, unique story that has led us to being here and doing these jobs. And I was talking to somebody last night in the pub. It's really, really difficult actually to do these jobs because we've all made a really deep connection in ourselves because of an experience that we've had with nature, with an animal at some point in our lives that has put us on this path to doing what we're doing now. But if we don't listen to that, then it just doesn't end up working. I think we forget about that a lot of the time. And when I go away, I'm very lucky to travel all around the world, to go to all these different conferences to try and engage people who don't understand this a lot of the time. They're suffering from many different pressures, and it's very political from their governments and things that they don't necessarily believe in. So when I'm there, when I'm working with all these different people, and I try to connect with them in a different way, and so when I've got to know them a little bit, I start to ask them quite sort of in-depth questions that they're not expecting. And I ask people, tell me about an experience that you've had in nature or with an animal that has really stayed with you your entire life. And I did this once, and the answer I got back just floored me immediately, and I was like, wow, why aren't people telling these stories all the time? And it links back to what Tom was saying earlier on, like everybody's got a story, their own personal story, but I think so many people aren't telling that story. So then I started doing it more, and every time I'd go out for dinner or drinks with everybody, I'd ask them, what's your personal incredible story that you've had with an animal? And I would share mine. And I've sat there in all different bars and places all around the world asking people this question. And I've laughed with people, I've cried with people, and these experiences, they are what drive people to turn up and do these jobs that are so difficult, because we love what we do. We love animals, we love nature, we love the ocean, we love being out in it, but we're so consciously aware of the destruction that our favorite thing is undergoing every single day. It's really, really hard to continue showing up, but we do. And I think that's amazing, because it's really, really hard to see that all the time. Looking at some of the images from the previous presentation, we all love whales and dolphins, but we have to go and witness these horrible things that they suffer from at our hand all of the time. So those are the reasons why people care. It's their own personal stories, and they act off the back of it, and they show up every single day, and they don't let that insanity of the world kind of affect them. And and then I was thinking about, but then how does that create change? How do we build that in? So once people have got that connection and their own story and something that's influenced them, they continue to show up all the time, and it's just something, you don't have a choice in it after a while. It becomes a part of who you are, and it gets you up in the morning, and it gets you turning your computer on, reading through your emails, or doing whatever you need to do. There's something that's innate within you that links back to an experience that you've had. And for a lot of people, I was thinking about this historically, it's things like becoming consciously aware of nature and listening to whale song. When people heard whale song in the 60s and the 70s, after people became conscious of that, it created this entire Save the Whale movement, which has led to the moratorium on commercial whaling, which is potentially one of the biggest conservation successes of all time. And then when I'm working with people all around the world, and I've made these connections with them, and I've told them my personal story, and they've told me their personal story, that creates some kind of bond or connection with those individuals, which which changes things, and you end up working in a different way because you're realizing that you've made this connection with somebody, and they feel the same thing as you do, and you might not be able to explain it a lot of the time. And I've done this with lots of people working on lots of different agreements, International Whaling Commission, Convention on Migratory Species, UNFCCC, all these different groups of people who work on different things. And then once you've developed that connection with people, and you know it's the same, and you're maybe working on different things, then you start to work for each other, and that kind of layers and creation and building of different energy kind of multiplies itself. And then when you're there and you're getting 4 hours sleep at different meetings, you're getting up for those other people because you want to have success for them, because they hold up a mirror to yourself, and you just become this really tight-knit, incredible team of people that are just getting stuff done because you care, and because you've shared those stories and you understand those people better. I was in a meeting last week with one of the lead negotiators for the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we were talking about all different things. And she's been doing that job for 20 years, and I've seen her on the floor of these convention meetings. She's such a tough, hard negotiator, and actually I was terrified of her for about a year and a half before I plucked up the courage to go and speak to her. Turns out she's a really lovely person. And we were talking about policy and how do we create change, and I had this talk in mind, and she said something that I never ever expected her to say, and that's that we just need to bring that emotion back into the conversation, because we're looking at everything through the lens of data and graphs, and we're all just terrified all the time of everything that's going on, and we need to bring it back to that connection, that thing that gets us up in the morning, because that's why we're all here, right? We don't want any of these things to happen. Sounds crazy. I don't actually want my job. I want to live in a world where we don't have to worry about these things, where we don't have to worry about bycatch, where we don't have to worry about entanglements, or all of the different things that these species that we love are suffering from. So bringing that emotion back in and talking about it, we shouldn't hide from it. And most of us are from Britain. I know I'm from England. So that's also one of the reasons why it was a struggle for me to come up here, because I thought I might be lynched. It's still early in the day. But how do we fix that? How do we make people care? And I think we've all got a responsibility to do that, and many of you do it all the time. You found these connections. You go out shore watching, and I'm sure many of you have spoken to your friends and your family, and you've got them to come along, and then you've had an experience yourself, and you've seen something, and you've gone, wow, and it's like shaken you to your core, and you're like, well, this is my life now. This is what I do. I have no other choice but to do this because I felt this incredible connection to this thing, and you can't really describe it. But then I think you need to talk about that more, and you need to facilitate those opportunities for other people to have those experiences. And whether it's your children, whether it's your friends, whether it's your parents, anybody, we all need to try and get people out into nature to have those experiences, and then go and talk about it, because then that just builds this positive energy and this enthusiasm for everything that we're working on behalf of. So please just do that. Help everybody tune into that wonder of nature and animals and the ecosystems that we've got all around us, so that people find that way to connect. And for yourself as well, right? We're all so busy. We're all just swamped in emails and all of these different things that we've got to do all the time. But I really encourage you to take a moment out of every single day and to remember why it is you do this job. Remember why it is that you connect to doing what we do, because that's what keeps us going. I do this on a daily basis. I think about some of the incredible things that I've got to experience as part of this job, and some of the things that I've seen. And then I get over the stress, I get over the worry of the thing that I'm working on. I'm like, well, I've just got to push through that, because that's the thing I'm working on, and that's why I care, and that's why I'm here. So just take that moment every single day. It doesn't have to be anything profound. Just go outside. Just really feel the air going into your lungs. Like, look at a leaf. Turn a leaf over and look at the incredible intricacies of it. Just stop and listen to the birds singing. Because when you do, and when you start to feel that little smile creeping across your face, that's it. That's that thing. That is why you care, and that's what gets you up and helps you to do that job. All those different things along that project management spectrum that we need to do to create change, you can't do them unless you feel that thing every day that keeps you going. So do that for yourselves, do it for your friends, do it for your children, everybody. Help them have those experiences and remember them and talk about them and ask people that question. What's your experience that you've had with an animal that stuck to you? And I think if you ask people that in their coffee break today, you will get some of the most amazing stories that you've ever heard that never would have been told. And I think that can really help us in what we're trying to do. So hopefully I managed to claw back a little bit of time there. Thank you very much, and look forward to speaking to you over the course of the day. Cheers.
Thank you, Ed. And yeah, Ed is correct. We are going into our coffee break, and he's nicely set up us with a little icebreaker for everybody to chat with each other during the coffee break. Just another round of applause for all of our morning keynotes. Thank you so much.
You may be in a different seat, meet a new person. All right, so welcome back for our short talk session. So we have a number of speakers this morning who have a 9-minute short talk each, and you will see that we are going to keep them to that, so that allows you to have a taste of some of the amazing different areas of work that are going on here in Scotland. Can I just check for people online that you can actually hear us? Katie's going to, you can hear us through the... Okay, amazing. So Katie can hear us. So welcome back to everybody who's online. We apologize for being a little bit late. We're going to kick off this short talk session with Danny Morris. So Danny's passion for marine life and community engagement has shaped his diverse career. He's worked as a dive master, supported Indigenous involvement in the Mariana Trench MPA with Pew Charitable Trusts. He's volunteered with BDMLR. He's built spatial data for the Lamlash Bay no-take zone, and now he's with Orkney Island Council, where he played a key role in developing the Orkney Islands Marine Planning Partnership and preparing the Regional Marine Plan. Danny has demonstrated his exceptional commitment and drive to take forward a pioneering process of local statutory marine planning and management in Orkney, including leading the development of the Orkney Islands Marine Region Finfish Farming Spatial Guidance, which is the most advanced spatial guidance for finfish farming in the UK and goes significantly beyond existing practice. He's deeply committed to sustainable ocean management and was recently shortlisted for the Bob Earl Early Career Impact on Ocean and Coastal Management at the Ocean and Coastal Futures Conference earlier this year. So please welcome to the stage Danny Morris.
Just reset the timer. Thank you for that. That was a very nice introduction. So, yeah, as you just heard, I work for Orkney Islands Council as a marine planner. So I'm just going to talk about what regional marine planning is, what marine planning is, and how you guys can contribute as well. So before I get going, I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate how amazing the life is that we have around, well, these pictures are all taken in Orkney, but around Scotland and the UK as a whole. It really is incredible. But as a marine planner, one of the challenges that we face is that alongside our duty to protect these things, we also have a busy and a growing marine economy. So everything from offshore wind to experimental wave and tidal devices, as you can see up at the top there, to fishing, aquaculture, oil and gas. There's so much going on. If you can think of it, it's happening somewhere probably. And that's a good thing. It supports the lifestyles that we want to live. It creates jobs. We generate energy. Yeah, it's good that we have these there, but we need to make sure that developments are happening in a way that's good for the environment and good for the biodiversity, so in a sustainable, appropriate way. So that's why marine planning is so important. So just to take a step back then and look at what actually is marine planning, because it's a fairly new concept, especially in terms of what governments and councils are doing. So at its core, marine planning, it's understanding the distribution of human activities alongside the natural world, and it's then developing strategies and plans and policy documents and accounting for that. So it's balancing the environmental, social and the economic objectives. So quite often you'll hear about the wedding cake model that planners use. So if you think of 3 tiers of a wedding cake, the environment is this base sort of core of the objectives that we think about. That's the foundations that prop everything else up. And then we have the social objectives, making places, nice places to live and having happy and healthy communities. And then only once we've got these first two bits of the wedding cake can we then have the economic objectives at the top. So that's how we sort of think about this structure of environmental, social and economic objectives. And it really is, it's a shift from what traditionally we would have sort of governments and countries looked at each thing individually, whereas now we tend to look at a more holistic approach, looking at everything all together and how they interact. And as marine planners, we also adopt policy documents. So in our case, at Orkney Islands Council, we're working on a regional marine plan for Orkney. But just to stress that marine planning is not the same thing as marine plans. There is a difference there. So marine planning is this bigger picture, looking at everything all together in terms of strategies and how different things interact. Whereas marine plans, they do that, but the marine plans themselves are specific policy documents. So that's for giving consent to developments. So it has sets of policies on things from nature conservation, protection, to the historic environment, marine litter and waste, underwater noise and vibration, a whole suite of policies. And if a development comes in, we assess that development against these policies. So that's what a regional marine plan is. And these are the different regions of Scotland that can progress with regional marine plans. And they're really a great way of doing things over the national approach, because they've been written by the local organisations, so usually it's made centrally in Edinburgh, whereas the regional marine plans, it's been delegated to these regions to write themselves, so they can focus on specific issues and use locally relevant data. And another way in which regional marine planning really shines above the national approach, which is good, but the regional approach means that we can engage at a scale that's relevant to the local communities. And that's an important and a regular part of our job. So we get out often. We run workshops, we run consultation events on our regional marine plan. We do sessions in schools to hear about what's important to the children. You know, we are members of the community who are writing these plans, so we know a lot of the fishers by name. We know the different organisations that operate in our marine area. So yeah, we really have that connection to the local community that it's much harder to achieve when it's just done nationally. And it can also feel a little bit like this sometimes, members of the community, but also new developers, even us sometimes as marine planners. It's a really complex space, the policy and the legislation in the marine environment. It's sort of grown over time with more and more being added, so part of our job is to just help the community and developers navigate this pretty complex policy framework. So that's a little bit on what marine planning is and what regional marine plan is. And I just wanted to talk about how evidence is used in decision making, because I know a lot of people in this room will be out there collecting data through citizen science projects or other means research projects. So there's sort of two different types of data. There's the baseline data that informs plans and policy, and that's the data that's been collected over a long time. It's sort of continuously ongoing. And then if an application comes in for development, the developer will also quite often collect data at the point of application. So things like seabed surveys, benthic surveys, hydrographic modelling. Us as decision makers, we can require developers to collect more information if we think something's missing. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on the citizen science and local knowledge, because that is really important to what we do as marine planners, and it's really important to have that data out there. And it does make a difference. So everything that's collected, it does improve local marine knowledge and data. This long-term standardised data, which has been done by projects like Shore Watch, which I get involved in, Project Seagrass with their seagrass spotter, Sea Search with their scuba diving. It just really helps us learn what's where, and really helps plug these data gaps that are out there that we can then use going forwards. But ideally, it does need to be in a national data set, so it needs to be standardised and recognised by someone like Nature Scot here in Scotland. Or if not, if it's in a published paper, then that at least gives it that weight for us to use when we're making decisions. It can also inform other documents, other projects that are on the go. So yeah, this is a screenshot from our fish farming spatial guidance that we're working on. And this has huge amounts of data into it. And it's this heat map that identifies areas of constraint for new fish farm developments. so the more sensitive areas. And so even if the data doesn't get used directly in some decisions or in some policy documents, it can go into other spatial guidance documents that are out there. And the baseline data that's used for things like regional marine plans, although, so if there might be a project that's quite locally specific, say in Orkney, but decisions made at the national level, they do need to be made in accordance with the regional marine plans. So it might feel as though it's only been used in a regional marine plan, but legally that has to be taken into account by decision makers at the government. So yeah, it all feeds in, and regional marine plans are quite a rare opportunity to influence the national sort of policy because of that. And just sort of the final slide here, something that I get asked quite often is by members of the public who are saying, can I actually influence decisions? Like, does the feedback that I give actually make a difference? And it's a resounding yes, it really does. I just wanted to give a few examples of how that works. On top of the data that's collected that is used, you can do things like responding to consultations. So there's the upcoming consultation on the National Marine Plan 2, and that'd be a really great opportunity to sort of give your thoughts. And I'm saying this as someone who is currently working through, with my colleague Emily, who's in this room, hundreds of comments on our regional marine plan. We just finished the consultation, and we're responding to every comment and changing a PAM where appropriate to do so. So it really does make a difference. But when you do that, just make sure that you're concise and you're specific. So if you think a policy can be written better, then suggest better wording. You need to put it on a plate for decision makers and policy writers. Just really be concise in what you say and give suggestions. So general thoughts are good, but it's much harder to change a plan on someone's general thoughts that a policy isn't great, as opposed to someone who's given a suggestion for what could be said, or pick up other data that's relevant and point it out to us. But yeah, and there's other suggestions on there. So just the takeaway points then, so regional marine planning, balancing the environmental, social and the economic objectives at the local level. All data can inform decision making, but it does need to be robust and standardised. And support for regional marine plans is important. They're very locally specific. And if you have something to say on a development, then please do say it, because it does make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. That was like spot on time. We're going to have a couple of minutes, hopefully, at the end to put questions to all of our speakers. So we're going to move on for now. So following a professional, I'm apologizing, I'm using my notes because these people have all done incredible things, and I kind of want to make sure I get it right when I tell you. Following a professional background in marine mammal conservation and policy advice, Julia Sutherland has recently completed her PhD at the University of St. Andrews Sea Mammal Research Unit. Her PhD research investigated the predator-prey interactions of killer whales and seals in coastal Shetland, utilizing a variety of data set, including field-based observations, citizen science, and community-led monitoring data. She's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of St. Andrews, continuing her research at SMRU and the Center for Research into Ecological and Environmental Modeling. So please welcome to the stage, Julia Sutherland.
Sorry, it appears to be on a timer, so I'm going to have to try and beat the timer somehow. We'll see how that goes. Oh, I've broken it.
No, Grant's untimering it for you.
Oh!
Wave at the screen, that's Grant. Up in the
Oh, thank you very much! Hi. Hi. So I'm Julia, and it is a genuine pleasure to be here today to talk about some of my PhD findings. Surprise, what's going to be on this slide? My research takes place in the context of the harbour seal decline. And for those of you that aren't aware, harbour seals along the north and east coast of Scotland have predominantly undergone declines, whereas on the west coast they're typically stable or increasing. There's a huge body of research at the Sea Mammal Research Unit that has been looking into potential drivers of these declines, including prey availability, biotoxins in prey, interactions with grey seals, and killer whale predation. Unsurprisingly, I'm focusing on the killer whale predation. And as you can see from the graph on the left, there's a strong spatial overlap in where we're seeing killer whales and where we're seeing these regional declines in harbour seals.
Now, historical research has investigated this, kind of looking at the foraging ecology of killer whales and the potential role they might have in the harbour seal decline. However, this was done back in around about 2009, 2011, and since then there's been a paucity of research, which is where my PhD came in. This is really good at keeping me on time. So the study area is Shetland, and when I talk about inshore Shetland, my PhD was land-based, so it was typically sightings within 2.5 kilometres of the shoreline, and predation events were collated within 1 kilometre of the shoreline. In terms of the killer whale population, as it were, we have individuals from the Northern Ireland community, Scotland, Iceland migrants, and roving males. So for the sample year that I'm using here is 2021, that equates to roughly 50 individuals seen regularly. So the knowledge gaps I'll be addressing as part of this presentation include the prey composition of the killer whales, the killer whales' energetic requirements and the energetic content of their prey species, and how often the killer whales are present in space and time. So starting off with the prey composition and the prey identification. Good Lord. Predation attempts were collated between 2016 and 2023 from fieldwork, citizen science, and drone monitoring. And as you can see from these images, such as the one in the top left, it's quite clear to see that that's a grey seal being targeted. However, the bottom left, that could be the remains of either a harbour or a grey seal, and the bottom right could be any form of mammal. So to objectively identify without bias, I established this expert elicitation panel. Oh, God. An expert elicitation panel where I basically asked a load of people for their subjective identification of the prey species, so we could quantify the killer whale prey composition, accounting for biases in prey identification. So we asked them for their subjective probability, and it was the most likely prey species with associated confidence. So based on this, we managed to get the prey composition of 127 predation events were collated. So a vast majority of them were seals, either harbour or grey. 25 were identified as harbour seals, 20 as grey seals, 7 as porpoise, 6 as a very anatomically accurate seabird, and 16 as unknown mammals. But then the next step was to look at probability of capture versus escape given an encounter with a killer whale. And of the variables included, prey species came out as important, and I'd like to draw your attention to the red line here, which is harbour seal, and the blue line, which is grey seal. And harbour seals had twice as high a probability of being captured and consumed given an encounter with a killer whale in comparison to grey seals. Distance to coast was also incredibly important, with events occurring further from the coast having a higher probability of success than those close to the coast. However, there are some caveats associated with this, including uncertainty in prey species ID. So this grey bar is seals, and that's unknown harbour or grey. Seasonal bias with a lot of the data collection coming from the summer months, and some spatial limitations with a very highly coastal data set. So the next step, once the prey species composition was estimated, we needed to work out how much energy was in the prey species. Unfortunately, seals don't come with a nutritional label, so we had to calculate it ourselves. And similarly, we also needed to calculate how much different individual killer whales, males, females, adults, juveniles, needed. And then we needed to know how often the killer whales were present on a given day. If I press pause, will that pause it? No. And we did this using data from the Shetland Biological Record Centre, and importantly here, pod-specific days equates to the demography of the pod, so the energetic requirement that those pods needed. Once we collected all these data gaps, it was put into something called a Monte Carlo uncertainty analysis, which ran 10,000 simulations and spat out a load of things. And it estimated that adult males need roughly 120,000 calories a day. Adult females 90,000 calories a day, and juveniles 61,000 calories a day. And what does that mean in terms of the animals they need to eat? So based on the prey composition from the expert elicitation, that equates to roughly 91 harbour seal adults, 193 juveniles and 112 pups, 33 grey seal adults and 73 grey seal juveniles. I should say that grey seal pups aren't included here, and that's not to say that they're not taken, just that we didn't observe any in our sample set. So after this, what does that all mean? The killer whales are supposedly eating this much. What does it mean? So in the context of the harbour seal decline, where harbour seals have undergone a stepwise decline in Shetland, we needed to simulate some trajectories going forward, because it's difficult to look back at the past. So to do this, we took seal population parameters such as births and deaths, the killer whale predation estimates that I've just shown, and put it into something called a Leslie matrix model. But given the amount of uncertainty that we've identified throughout the research, we explored 3 different scenarios. So the first scenario said we hit the nail on the head, we got everything right, what does that mean for the harbour seal population? The second one says, okay, we might have got the diet composition slightly wrong, if we wiggle a few things, what does that mean? And the third one says we've got the seal population vital rates wrong, which means killer whale predation might already be incorporated in those vital rates to some extent, so the births and death rates in the population. So in the first one, saying we got everything spot on, it said that in 35 years, the entire harbour seal population in the seal management area would be significantly depleted after 15 years. The second scenario, with a slight change in prey composition, said that the harbour seals would be completely depleted within 25 years. And the third one, which was a slight change in population parameters for the seal species, it kind of gave these divergent trajectories. So some said that they were depleted, some said they would increase, and some said that they would stay stable. So it was far less certain. So in terms of the take-home and future research, killer whale predation does have the potential to hinder recovery and result in some declines. However, there are still some uncertainties in the prey composition of the killer whales in terms of the species and particularly age classes of seals that they are taking. Also, the killer whales' field metabolic rates, exactly how much they need to eat. There's a potential for them to switch to more abundant prey resources, so these massive declines and harbour seals being completely depleted is unlikely to happen because they could switch to other prey resources such as grey seals, harbour seals, and there's some uncertainty in the seal baseline vital rates. Going forward, we're particularly interested in consumptive and non-consumptive effects. One in particular is this landscape of fear effect, where, as I said, distance to coast was found to be a significant predictor of being captured or consumed. And these tracks here, in the middle thing, are from telemetry tracks from harbour seals in Shetland, which show this extreme coastal hugging behaviour. And one of the primary methods of escape was the seal fleeing to the shoreline. So this landscape of fear effects, okay, maybe the seals are actually being confined to the coastline because there is such a risk of predation that they're afraid to travel elsewhere. But that is a working hypothesis. We're also interested in species-specific vulnerability. So again, are harbour seals actually more vulnerable to predation in comparison to killer whales? And ultimately, we want to incorporate all of this information into impact assessments and population consequences of disturbances, because predation is a natural threat on the seals, right? And to protect the seals, to protect the predator, you also need to protect the prey. So if harbour seals are under stress from predation and natural pressure, then that's all the more justification to try and protect them from anthropogenic pressures, for example. To finish, I'd like to say a huge thank you to my PhD supervisory team. A huge thank you to all the citizen scientists, funders, sponsors, collaborators. Of the 127 predation events I used in this, 9 of them were collected from my own fieldwork. So when I say this couldn't have been done without citizen science, I'm really not exaggerating it. And thank you very much for listening, and apologies for the, technical issues.
That was fantastic, Julia. Well done for keeping up with the timer. So we now have a dynamic duo who decided that 9 minutes was just enough time for 2 of them to talk. Susie Calderon is a whale researcher who works at the Scottish Association for Marine Science, SAMS, and is a member of the Scottish Entanglement Alliance that you heard about earlier today. Her focus is on large whale ecology and human impacts on whales, and includes working with fishermen who reduce whale entanglement and bycatch in fishing gear through practical, bottom-up, fisheries management-led solutions. And she's joined by, well known if you've been here before, Bally Philp, a fisher and outreach officer for the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation, who's recently gotten involved in a successful disentanglement on Skye.
Thank you very much, Alice. Hello, everybody. I'm Susie Calderon, and this is Bally Philp. I'm at the Scottish Association of Marine Science. Bally's at the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation, and we are both members of the Scottish Entanglement Alliance. And I'm going to talk a bit about some work that we've been doing on trying to reduce entanglement risk of large whales and basking sharks in the Scottish creel fishery. And then Bally's going to talk a bit about what happens when a whale does get entangled in creel gear, and how he and Hayden disentangled it. So you had heard from Ellie earlier that the Scottish Entanglement Alliance did some work that started a few years ago to understand the nature of marine animal entanglements in Scottish fisheries. And one of the things Ellie did was go around the country and interview Scottish creel fishermen about their experiences of entanglement, where in the gear they were entangling animals, what animals were getting entangled. And Ellie interviewed about 12% of the Scottish inshore creel fishing fleet and found some really interesting information. This was all part of the first project that the Scottish Entanglement Alliance did, and these are the project members on the board just here. So, Ellie found out a lot of really interesting things about the nature of entanglement in Scottish creel fisheries, which is published in this paper if you're interested in looking at that. There were more entanglements than people knew about simply from strandings by interviewing fishermen about what they'd actually entangled. And the interesting thing was that about 80% of minke whale entanglements and about 80% of basking shark entanglements and about 50% of humpback whale entanglements, the animals were caught in the ground lines between creels. So what do we mean by that? So the top left picture is what people often think a fleet of creels looks like when it's on the seabed. You've got all these nice, neat creels on the seabed and some nice, neat ground line lying along the middle between those creels. What it actually looks like is more like the bottom right picture, because the rope used in Scottish creel fisheries is generally buoyant. So between the creels, it floats in these loops between the pots, often 3 or 4 metres high. And so these loops entangle whales and sharks by their flippers, their tails, and their mouths. And if they're minke whales or basking sharks, they're not strong enough to swim with the gear, so they tend to die in situ, which is why it was possible to know what part of the gear the whales were getting entangled in. So some of the fishermen who Ellie spoke to suggested that maybe use sinking line, negatively buoyant line that lies on the seabed, instead of using floating line. And we thought, well, that's great. That would be really great for the whales and sharks, but would it actually be practical for the fishermen to fish with? Because there's no point making suggestions that don't work. So in 2022, we started this project that was funded by the Nature Restoration Fund to work with fishermen to trial negatively buoyant rope. So 15 fishermen, including Bally, and including Hayden and Duncan, who's also here today, we had 15 fishermen who trialled about 60 fleets of sinking rope in their gear, and they just went fishing with it. And every time they hauled a set of gear, they would say how it was. Had it abraded? Was it picking up mud? Was it snagging on the bottom? Was it noisy in the hauler? Was it horrible to handle? Basically, was it viable to fish with? And we also did some ROV work. Bally did, he's got an ROV. And this is what floating rope looks like in the water. So there's creel on the bottom, and you can see the line that joins the creel to the ground rope is floating, and the ground rope is floating away from the creel. And you can see that here as well. There's a creel at the bottom of the picture that you can't see. You've got the joining rope, which we call a stopper, and then the back rope, the ground line that's floating away. So you can see these loops are really quite significant. But then you look at what the negatively buoyant rope, the sinking rope, looks like attached to the creel. You see the stopper is nice and just going down to the seabed, and also the negatively buoyant rope is just lying quite nicely on the seabed. It's not particularly heavy, it's only just negatively buoyant, so it's not scouring the seabed, it's not causing any damage, and it's not really heavy for people to haul. And we were very happy with the results. Most of the fishermen in the trial reported that the rope really wasn't very difficult to fish with, wasn't really very different from the rope that they normally fished with. The big issue for most fishermen is the price, because it's more expensive, and also in some areas where they're fishing. This was in crab and prawn fleets in the Inner Sound and Skye area. Some areas where there's lobster, for example, in poorer ground, rougher ground, it may be more problematic in terms of the gear snagging or coming fast. But what we're doing now is we've been very encouraged by this very, very collaborative project. This has been all about the fishermen working to see if the gear works for themselves. NGOs have been involved, scientists have been involved, but largely it's been about a bottom-up approach with fishermen using their expertise to say, will this work in inshore Scottish creel fisheries? Because nobody's interested in suggesting things that aren't actually going to work. So that part of the project, in terms of initially seeing if rope is practical to use, has gone well. And in terms of picking up mud, fasteners, braiding, the rope really wasn't very problematic. In terms of entanglement, so I guess I've been working in bycatch and entanglement for really quite a long time, and it's fairly miserable in terms of solutions actually being viable and workable. And this is potentially a simple and relatively cheap solution. It's an engineering solution. It doesn't rely on knowing very much at all about the animal's behaviour. You've just got ropes that lie on the bottom, can't form loops, so they can't entangle animals, and it's as simple as that. And most of the issue is to do with cost, and obviously also fishermen's time in terms of actually the time it takes to re-rope fleets. So what we're doing at the moment is we're going around the rest of the country. We're talking to fishermen in all Scottish coastal areas, offering them the chance to trial some rope as well, seeing what their concerns are, what their suggestions are. And what we're working towards is some management decisions at a government level, because the government has obligations under the Fisheries Act to reduce and eliminate entanglement, and therefore there is a legal obligation attached to this, which should hopefully have some kind of funding attached to it. So that's our sort of timeline. In 3 minutes it sounds much more simple than it is, but actually things, unusually for bycatch and entanglement issues, are going in quite a good direction. Obviously, entanglements still occur. We would like them not to occur anymore, and that's what we're working towards. But they do still occur, and what Bally is going to talk about now is an entanglement of a humpback whale that happened a couple of weeks ago on Skye, and that Bally and Hayden released this animal, and he's going to talk to you about how that happened and how they did it. Yes, press that one.
So we talked about stories earlier on, and actually this is the other way around. This is my worst nightmare. For most fishermen, it's their worst nightmare, tangling a large cetacean. We got a call from Ellie, myself and Hayden. We've both done disentanglement training, and we were out fishing. And we got a call about a whale entangled nearby on Skye, a couple hours away. And then we went in touch with BDMLR, who had done a provisional assessment from some drone footage, and they thought this whale was maybe entangled in an end line, and we offered to stand by and assist if they required anybody to haul the gear. BDMLR sent out one of their volunteers who made an observation about this whale, and then we got to see this video, and we shared it with a few of our other colleagues like Susie and Marielle, who's here, and we all came to the same conclusion that this animal didn't look like it was in an end line. It looked like it might be carrying quite a lot of weight and struggling to get to the surface, and that we should try and maybe intervene to see if we could assist in disentangling this animal, or at least make a decent assessment of the situation. So we travelled to the location where the animal was, and you couldn't see much animal spending most of its time under the surface, but the buoy didn't seem to be moving around much, which gave us the impression that it wasn't entangled in the end line. And we managed to identify which gear we thought the whale might be entangled in, and we started hauling the gear quite slowly. What we noticed once we picked up the buoy was that the whale started to spend more time at the surface. We should be able to see this in a second. And once we made that observation, one, we knew it was in the right fleet of gear, and two, we were also quite confident it was no longer, the assessment was correct, it was in the end line. And we started hauling the gear, and it didn't take long to realise that the whale was managing to spend more and more time at the surface. You'll kind of see this in a second. So we've got most of the end line up, and we've got our way to the first creel. And hopefully we'll pan around to the whale in a second, and you'll see that the whale is managing to basically rest on the surface. Now, this is quite a quick video, and it makes it look like the whole thing happened a little bit quicker than it did. We've got the full video upstairs. Anthony, who's here somewhere, shot some amazing drone footage of this, and the whole 15-minute kind of disentanglement process was recorded by him. What we did was we let the animal rest for a while once we'd realised the weight was off it, and we tried to understand exactly what the nature of the entanglement was. And again, you'll see in a second, once the animal gets closer and closer to the surface, you can actually see through the water, and you can see the rope on the tail of the animal. And it turned out to be a relatively simple entanglement as these things go. There was a simple loop over the flukes, and we deduced from that it was probably worth us trying to attempt to disentangle it, and it was relatively safe to do so. What we seen when we first arrived was this animal, not quite porpoising, but spending only a few seconds at the surface, grabbing a gasp of breath and then going back down again. And the reason for that is because when it's entangled between the creels, to get to the surface, it has to lift a lot of creels off the bottom. And those creels are then acting like a spring on the animal and pulling it back down again. What's happened here now is we've got the creels up on the surface, and so this rope is now just going horizontal between the boat and the whale. So there's no longer any pull pulling the animal down. So again, it's been edited out, but we let this animal rest for 5 or 10 minutes and then decided to bring it a little bit closer and cut the animal free. And it's probably worth noticing that when BDM Lab do this, they do it out of a very small dinghy, and it's very dangerous. We have the privilege of being in quite a large boat, which may be slightly more dangerous from the whale's point of view, because a collision could be problematic. But from our point of view, it was very safe. And so I think we had the privilege of good weather, a very, very simple entanglement, and a big boat to work out of, which made it all very easy for us. So what's happening here is there's a twist in the rope. The animal's been spinning. And so the two keels have come together on the seabed, and then the loop of rope is now these two strands that are going between the boat and the whale. And yeah, as you can see, I'll just stop now, but I'll let the video run, and you'll see essentially one simple cut and the whale swims away. It's just figured out it's free.
Thank you so much, Susie and Barry. It's absolutely incredible to see that, and as you say, amazing weather and clarity to see as you described it. So it was really, really great to walk through that with you. And Susie and Bally will be upstairs later to talk to more. In the meantime, we are going to move on to Julia Steele. For those of you who know Emma Steele of Shorewatch and HWT fame, you will recognize a family resemblance. This is Emma's cousin in her second year of a PhD in Orkney, and she's exploring the critical question of how we can engage young people in marine decision-making. Her background in environmental science and marine policy, combined with her experience in climate activism, make her deeply aware of the injustices facing young people today, who remain largely excluded from ocean-related decisions. Through her co-research approach, Julia is leveraging voices of young people in Scotland and South Africa to develop strategies for decision makers to better include youth voices in shaping ocean futures. Please welcome Julia Steele.
Hi everyone, I'm disrupting the whale chat to give an important message, but I promise I think whales are really cool. So yeah, as Alice said, I'm Julia and I'm a second year PhD student up at Heriot-Watt in Orkney. And if you didn't know that there's a Heriot-Watt in Orkney, then don't worry, because either did I when I applied for my PhD, which doesn't say a lot for my attention to detail. But the reason I'm telling you that is because I felt so passionately about this project that I was willing to move to what feels like the windiest place on the planet, somewhere I've fallen in love with. And I'm going to tell you a little bit today about why I'm so passionate about that project and the approaches I'm taking in my research and how that can apply to all of you here. And I'm presenting today not only as a PhD researcher, but also as a young person myself who has experienced firsthand the injustices facing my generation, in which we have little to no influence over decisions that are going to affect us for a very long time. But before I go into my research, when I kind of first thought about the theme of today, which is meaningful change, the kind of first word that came to my mind was hope, which is maybe a little bit cheesy. But I think that hope is really what propels us forward and is the backbone of change. Because without hope, it's really hard to envision a better future. And without that vision, meaningful change becomes quite difficult. But we also need action. And for me, no one better represents that spirit of hope and action more than young people. Now, I'm sure you can all think of examples where young people have mobilised fellow citizens to tackle the root causes of climate change and environmental degradation. I think young people approach challenges with fresh eyes, unburdened by the biases that can sometimes come with experience. Young people's willingness to question the status quo, to innovate, and to push boundaries, I think, is a powerful reminder that change isn't only necessary, but possible. And when we think about the great uncertainties and complexities facing our oceans today, I think these perspectives are really essential, because too often our ocean challenges, governance, it's quite a top-down process, and it's driven by short-term economic gains. Now, if we can engage young people in the decisions that we make, we can not only make the whole process more accessible for broader communities, but we can also shift that power imbalance and look towards a more kind of longer-term vision that's kind of got sustainability and equity at its core. But, and there's always a but, young people are not being meaningfully engaged in shaping our ocean's future. So why is that? There are a lot of issues that I've been learning about in my PhD. This ranges from power imbalances and a lack of funding and resources to meaningfully engage young people in these spaces. But there's also the kind of assumptions and perceptions that we have of young people. For example, I hear a lot of people say that young people are the kind of future custodians or future change makers. And while I agree with that sentiment, I think that also gives people permission to put us on the sidelines for a later problem. Also, the assumption that I get most often is that young people maybe don't want to be engaged or would have little to say anyway. And research shows that that couldn't be farther from the truth. And even a study that came out in Scotland recently showed that young people in Scotland really want to be engaged in shaping our ocean future. Also, the language that we use in kind of decision-making spaces is not very accessible. For example, like use of jargon and acronyms. But there's also a lot more hidden challenges, which I've become more aware of in my PhD. And one of them, for example, is that we don't even really know what we're talking about when we say youth. So there's no consensus in what we mean. And even between charities and organizations, there's not really overlap between the age ranges that we're using. And this kind of begs the question, how can we engage a group that we don't really even understand and can't define? And why in a lot of the literature I've been reading and discussions around youth engagement have young people very rarely been consulted? So this made me think a little bit more deeply about how I can approach my research in a way that invokes meaningful change, see what I did there, and centers young people at its core. So this brings me to my first kind of research approach, which is called co-research. And this is basically a way where you can bring in people to the research instead of just treating them as mere subjects of study. So in other words, it kind of decolonizes the research process, and suddenly young people are equal partners. And what this means is that young people become co-creators of the strategies that we're trying to figure out to engage them in ocean decision-making. And what I love about this approach is that I think it serves as a model for how we should all be engaging with youth as equal partners. And I just want to highlight this diagram, which is kind of shows what co-research can look like in practice. So right now I'm in my recruitment phase. So if you are a young person and want to get involved in this, come find me. You can't miss me in this jumpsuit. But also I really want to highlight this, I think there's a laser here. Yeah, this kind of feedback loop here. And to say that if you are working with youth or wanting to work with youth, giving feedback on how their voices have been incorporated is really important for that empowerment there. Okay, so my other approach is case study. So the two countries I'm looking at are Scotland and South Africa, and within that I'm looking at the Clyde Marine region in Scotland and the Western Cape Marine region in South Africa. So the rationale for a case study approach is really that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to youth engagement. So basically, the youth demographic is incredibly diverse, and so what might work in one context or one scale might not necessarily work in another. So by taking this approach, we can make our strategies more nuanced. And another reason for this is originally my project was focused in Scotland, but I got some funding to go to South Africa and actually expand the scope of my study. And this was really important because the reading I've been doing recently has found that young people in developing countries have not had the same opportunities to engage as those in developed countries. So this research now kind of addresses that imbalance. And a key point I want to make here, if you're engaging with young people, is to make sure that you are also including underrepresented youth. So that could be young carers, young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, young people who are living in remote locations. And that's where something like funding is really key, kind of wide recruitment strategies, partnering with EDI groups or youth groups in local communities is really key there. So what are the implications of this project? So the implications go far beyond advancement of knowledge because it empowers young people. The outcomes will hopefully shape policy, inclusive policy, sorry. So this is going to look like potentially like a co-created policy brief or maybe a multi-stakeholder workshop where young people can actually like invite adults into the space and communicate those kind of needs and priorities and concerns and strategies to them. But what I'm really excited about this project is the ability to kind of facilitate a network of young people across borders who are passionate about having their voice heard. Cool. So I'd just like to conclude by saying that as we stand at a pivotal moment for our ocean, the decisions we make will shape marine ecosystems for generations to come. But it's not just about what we decide that matters. It's also about how we decide and who we're bringing into those decisions. The good news is that we're starting to see change, and there is growing recognition of the importance of engaging young people. But we must make sure that this doesn't just become a tick box exercise. And it's time to create spaces where young people aren't just given a seat at the table, but a space to shape that conversation as equal partners. And I'd just like to finish by asking a question to the panel for later this afternoon, which is how are you, or can you, open up meaningful spaces for young people in your line of work? So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and to WDC and SMASS for inviting me. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia, and we'll make sure to write that question down and get it to Lindsay, wherever you have managed to sit in this second. She's on it. She's on it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. That was brilliant, and it is really important that we have all the different voices here, so thank you for sharing your research. We look forward to seeing how it goes forward. So next up we have Thomas Weber. Thomas Weber is a marine ecologist with a keen interest in using acoustics to study marine mammals. So he's currently pursuing his PhD, and his research focuses on investigating occurrence of rhesus dolphins along the west coast of Scotland using passive acoustic monitoring. He has developed a deep learning, AI, classifier to find rhesus dolphin vocalizations, which is hoped to enable their distribution patterns to be modeled.
Hi, I'm Thomas. So yeah, as you now know, I'm doing my PhD at the Scottish Association for Marine Science based in Oban over on the west coast. And I'm just going to give you a very brief overview about some of the work I've been doing to try and find rhesus dolphins in acoustic data. So for a little bit of context, rhesus are found all over the world, but usually in very deep waters. But as you can see from this sightings map, we get quite a high concentration of them off the Scottish west coast. And so we're kind of wanting to know what makes Scotland so important for rhesus dolphins. And there's been lots of work already undertaken, and we even have a marine protected area established for rhesus dolphins off the coast of Lewis, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And one of the ways we want to try and learn more is through passive acoustic monitoring. And if we zoom into the coast of Scotland and Northern Ireland, we've got this entire network of underwater microphones we call hydrophones, listening to all the sounds in the ocean and recording these. And what we can do is then look through all this data and try and find our rhesus dolphin calls. And so the aims of this project really to investigate the wider distribution, provide some recommendations for acoustic monitoring for the MPA. But we've got this huge amount of data, this is decades worth of recordings, and so we need an efficient way to be able to go through all of this. We've also got 7 different species of dolphins in the Scottish water, so it's not just as easy as going through and finding dolphin vocalizations. We need some way to tell us which are Risso's dolphins. Now, most of you are probably familiar with dolphin whistles, but Risso's dolphins don't actually whistle that often, and so we're a bit more reliant on looking for their echolocation clicks. And so this is what it kind of looks like when we're visualizing the sound. So we've got time along the bottom and frequency or pitch along the side, and each of those vertical lines is a single echolocation click. And there's lots of tools available to us to be able to find individual clicks. So this is an example of that sound zoomed in really, really small, so less than a second on each individual click. And one of the ways that we can be able to tell if this is a Risso's dolphin or not is by using AI. Now, AI, I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing about this in the news. We get loads of negative press, but AI is really, really good at pattern recognition, even better than human experts in some fields. So if it's good enough for cancer diagnosis, and if it's good enough to improve drug development, then why not marine mammal research? And so I came across this nice little GIF to try and help me explain how deep learning works. And this is going to use cats and dogs. And essentially what we do is we give our model lots of pictures of cats, and we tell them it's a cat. And we give it lots of pictures of dogs, and we say it's a dog. And eventually it will be able to tell us that a cat is a cat and a dog is a dog. But in our case, rather than cats and dogs, we're going to use dolphins. And instead of pictures of dolphins, we're going to feed it those sounds, so those individual echolocation clicks. Deep learning is great, but we do need lots of data to be able to train our deep learning models. Unfortunately for us, there's been lots of surveys around the coast of Scotland. So some of you might recognise Silurian, so this is HWDT's survey vessel. And they've been going around the west coast for years now, collecting sightings data and acoustics data. And this is great for us because when they see a dolphin, we get our acoustic recording, and we also get the volunteers, the scientists, the crews on board telling us which species that's from. And so from HWDT and a few other surveys around Scotland and a bit further off into the Atlantic, we've been able to get recordings of 8 different species that are seen in the UK. And it's taken me a long while to get here, but this is where SureWatch comes in. So we have all this data, we've trained our model, but we want to know how well does that actually perform on that big network of acoustic recorders around Scotland. And from talking to Alice and Katie at WDC, they said one of the SureWatch sites in particular, at Lathron, was seeing lots and lots of Risso's dolphins. And it just so happened that the Scottish Government had an acoustic recorder slap bang in the middle of all these sightings. And so when we pair the acoustic data with all these sightings, we were able to find 3 different species of dolphins and lots of vessel noise we could use to test our deep learning model. We also reached out to some colleagues down south in Northumberland, in England, and got some extra recordings of white-beaked dolphins. And so when we ran this through the model, I was quite pleased to see that our model could tell a Risso's dolphin was a Risso's dolphin, and that every other species wasn't a Risso's dolphin. And this basically gives us confidence to apply this model to the rest of that data around Scotland. And so the model basically spits out a presence or an absence in each recording, and we can put this into a modelling framework to start to investigate the occurrence of Risso's around Scotland. So if we pick 2 of those sites, we've got day of year along the bottom and a sort of likelihood that they'll be in a recording on the y-axis. And one site from Tolster, this is in the MPA off Lewis, and our Lathron site. And both have got this really clear spike in occurrence throughout the year. And we can break this down even more, looking at nighttime in red, daytime in blue, and are combined in black. And we can already see that both have got different peaks in occurrence, so this is quite interesting. On the East Coast site, we're also 2 times as likely to get Risso's, which was a bit surprising for us, though we think that's more with where the recorder's placed rather than Risso's dolphins thinking East Coast is best coast. And so this is just 2 sites from this massive network, so we've got lots of data still to chug through. But I'm quite excited to say that with all these SureWatch sightings, we've got 3 new recorders going in the water. So if we zoom into the North Coast and the West Coast, we've got 2 recorders off Lewis going in hopefully in May, thanks to Nature Scott. And we've got 1 already on the North Coast as part of the SPAN network. And so what we're hoping to do is also match up more of this acoustic and sightings data, not just for people like me who sort of nerd out on building classifiers and things like that,
but also the acoustic data to help supplement the sightings data and vice versa. So we're really excited to see what we can learn, not just about Risso's dolphins, but about all the vocal species we get around Scotland. So I just want to say a massive thank you to particularly the Shorewatch volunteers for all the hard work they've been doing, looking out over the years, sticking it out through wind, rain, midges and such, and all their data providers as well. So thank you very much.
So I am a lover of data fusion. Nothing makes me happier than seeing multiple data sets being brought together. So that was a brilliant presentation, not least because it's about Shorewatch. So we are now going to bring to the stage Nick Underdown. With an education in law and journalism, Nick has been head of communication and campaigns at Open Seas since 2016. It's a charity dedicated to restoring marine ecosystems and the sustainability of seafood harvested from our seas. So he developed a strong interest in public resource management, working as a local journalist, covering issues relating to land reform and inshore fisheries. And he has since assisted marine conservation campaigns, both at the community level for the Community of Arran Seabed Trust, nationally at Scottish Environment Link, and now at Open Seas, which seeks to bridge local activism, scientific research, and policy process to achieve change. So you can see why he's a perfect speaker for today's program. Welcome, Nick.
Hi folks, good morning, I've got it's good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I was invited to reflect on how to turn evidence into impact. You've got to forgive my prop here, I've got a real tendency to go into the backstory on things, so I've really got to keep myself to time. So implicit in that invitation is the idea that you can have all the evidence in the world, but that doesn't actually always lead to the right action. You know, the intellectual case for change is often already won. It's even parroted in official narratives, and yet the pace of change that we see around us is glacial, you know, or worse, decision makers are actually disregarding the evidence base altogether. So what can we do to increase the chances of converting evidence into impact? It's no big question. Open Seas, we're an evidence-based, impact-driven organisation. We were founded in 2016 with a vision for healthier seas, sustainable seafood and public good from public seas. We want to see the recovery of abundance in our marine environment. You know, we want to see the public being able to access a healthier marine environment. That means more mackerel from the pier, people being able to freely catch fish from the shore, to feed yourself, you know, to feed your family, to feed your community. Equitable access to productive commercial fisheries are also a huge part of that, and all the benefits that can bring. So for the past 8 years, we've been working towards that vision through targeted campaigns. And our starting point is that there is a clear evidence of a problem that needs solved, and that is the continued degradation, as we're all probably painfully aware, of our marine environment that undermines those potential public benefits. This evidence is acknowledged by most stakeholders. The Scottish Government's own assessments identify mobile bottom-towed fisheries, such as bottom trawling and dredging, as the single most widespread pressure on our seas. And I quote Nature Scot, the most recent UK Marine Strategy Assessment concluded that the physical disruption of the seabed from fishing gear, in particular the use of certain types of demersal gear, is a key factor preventing achievement of good environmental status for seabed habitats. Scotland's Marine Assessment highlighted pressures associated with bottom contacting and pelagic fishing as being the most widespread direct pressures across the majority of Scottish marine regions and offshore marine regions. So the damage to the seabed is undermining habitats that fish like, you know, to use for spawning and feeding, and the bycatch of both target and non-target species is undermining the recovery of fish populations. And yet the footprint of bottom-trawled fisheries is just not well managed. And for the past 40 years, bottom trawling has been legal across well over 90% of our inshore seabeds. And actions to address this, we just do not have the time to go into the backstory on this one, but the actions to address this are just being routinely delayed, politically routinely delayed. And we set up in 2016, we hoped that just by maybe more clearly presenting this problem in a more public way might spur policy change. And this relied a lot on first-hand evidence. We worked with the support of local witnesses, often divers, who helped us document instances of fishing, both illegal and legal fishing, that was damaging these important habitats. And we've tried to play a role in conveying this evidence to the media and to policymakers, often simultaneously. And that's had some impact. You know, after a string of quite well-documented instances of illegal scallop dredging, the Scottish Government, arguably 6 years later, has finally implemented remote electronic monitoring of the scallop dredge fleet in Scotland. But you know, that process for monitoring is still not applicable to the bottom trawl fleet. We do not know where a large proportion of the bottom trawl fleet in Scotland is operating, because there is no effective vessel monitoring on that fleet. And so whilst better vessel monitoring might help deter illegal fishing, it doesn't prevent the damaging activity that's actually still being licensed legally in the first place. I'm losing my track here. Where are we? This is a comparison between two seabed surveys around the Isle of Rin that we undertook inside the Small Isles Marine Protected Area, in an area that we knew scallop dredging had occurred. The left shows obviously a mirror bed, and the right shows clear scars of scallop dredging, 2 years later. Very similar area of seabed that we tried to resurvey. And the degradation of these habitats is happening under our collective watch as a society. It is now 10 years after Scotland's Marine Protected Area Network was designated, and over half of Scotland's MPAs still have no fisheries management in place. And a recent report to Parliament just at the end of last year, Nature Scot acknowledged that 75% of these MPAs are being managed in a way that will not achieve their conservation objectives. So what if, sorry, that was a wee extra thing. It's just to prove the point, these grounds aren't just pretty places, they are providing vital ecosystem function for our commercial fisheries and for our access to those fisheries. So what have we done? We have continued to gather evidence of damage to these habitats by collaborating with citizen science divers and undertaking seabed surveys using underwater ROVs. And we've submitted that evidence to communities. We've wrote countless letters and correspondences to various politicians at various levels. We've engaged with companies like corporations that are buying products that are sourced from areas where this environmental damage is occurring. And we have tried to stand alongside the many people within communities who have raised these concerns for decades now. For decades they have been raised. More recently, we have bought a boat ourselves to enable us to undertake more seabed surveys. And all this work encompasses, like a wide range of things, like communications, research, public affairs and policy. I suppose I'm just saying that because, I'm trying to reflect on what it takes to try and take that evidence into an impact space. And all those activities have huge synergies amongst them. But they're all underpinned by research. We quite often, internally as a team, we're just all reliant on the research that our colleagues do. And we are still very much on the journey to have impact. In the past 2 years, we have escalated this issue at a legal level. We have strategically litigated the Scottish Government's licensing of fisheries for failing to uphold their environmental duties and act in accordance with the National Marine Plan. And we won that case in 2023. And the Government's appeal was categorically rejected last year. The outworkings of that judgment by Scotland's highest civil court are a very live matter, but it still has not had impact on the water. That picture I showed you of the damaged seabed in the Small Isles MPA, that MPA is still left unprotected from those fishing methods, despite the statutory advice of the nature conservation advisors in Scotland. And the footprint of scallop dredging continues to degrade seabeds around our coastline, from the shores of Harris to the Sound of Raasay, and all along the west coast. I'd like to now, hopefully quite briefly, share some broader reflections. I find this a very difficult thing to prepare for, the idea of how do you turn evidence into impact. But I just really wanted to, I'm going to skip by that one. I just really wanted to focus on this idea that you really do, and it's so obvious, and many people have spoken about this more eloquently than me, is that you really need to know what you're trying to achieve. Every campaign needs a goal. You need a clear statement of how the world will change because of your work. I just cannot overstate that enough. And so the terminology of campaigning is important. You know, campaigning is not a dark art or something that you need to be apologetic about. It doesn't mean that you need to chain yourself to like an oil rig or organise public demos. It is just the means. It just means that you need to know what you want to achieve and you have a plan to achieve it. You know, I think Ed Goodall said it before, everything's a project, whether it's a project or a campaign. You just need to think in those terms. Campaigns can look very different. And I would just briefly entreat people to really understand the vocabulary of campaigning. Campaigning is for everyone. So, you know, your goals, that is what you want to achieve. Your situational analysis, you know, you want to understand the landscape, you want to understand who has the power. You want to know what you need to know to get change done. And you've got to ask yourself, can you really do that thing? Can you really get that change? Then you need to set your objectives. You know, these are specific changes that you want to see. I would urge everyone to be really thinking about SMART objectives. You make them very specific, make them measurable. All that clear mantra about SMART objectives, it's so obvious, but hold yourself to that. And once you've identified your objectives, you need a strategy. And you know, what are the best approaches to achieve those objectives? The tactics are what comes next. You know, what concrete actions will bring that strategy to life. A tactic is an act. It's a moment, a piece of work. It's a meeting in a village hall or a joint letter. Do not be tempted to jump to tactics. They can be very seductive. You know, some tactics feel very exciting, but they may have like zero influence on the world and the people that you're trying to influence. He was a sort of military strategist, but the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu said, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. You know, just do not jump forward to your tactics. Just work out your strategy for change. I had a few tips of things that I was going to suggest. I think I need to go, don't I? Yeah. The last one was just the most important one, was just to stay human. That came up with the talk earlier on. I just think you really got to stay human. You know, big gestures can achieve change. People are capable of change, and like magic things can happen if you have hope.
Thank you so much, Nick. And Nick will be joining us again as part of our panel so that we can talk to him a bit more about some of these tactics later. Just while I'm up here, can I get everyone to smile and wave and say Marine Forum? Marine Forum. I'm hungry and you're running late. So after lunch, we're going to move straight into our interactive sessions. So Marielle and I are going to just introduce these to you now with an individual slide each, and then we'll leave that slideshow running while lunch is going on. Okay, so...
I think I've got the first one.
Okay, yep.
Okay, can we get the first slide up for the interactive sessions? Woo, there we go. So we've already met Susie and Bally during the short talk, so I won't spend too much time introducing them again, but you can talk to them in person in their interactive session, which will be upstairs, and they'll be talking specifically about their groundbreaking Scottish Entanglement Alliance project, which is a big project between scientists, NGOs, and the fishing industry, creating real change.
And we have also already heard from Thomas, so if you're keen to hear more, he will talk you through the classifier setup, and he will how to set up some PAM, passive acoustic monitoring, to produce outputs and classifiers. So Thomas is going to be downstairs. Our sessions this afternoon will be half down here in the hallway where you entered and half upstairs. So you can find Thomas downstairs this afternoon.
Now moving back upstairs, we have Shepton, and she's worked on translation and representation of cetacean communications in arts and music. She was recently a Leverhulme International Fellow for her project entitled
Wrong slide. That slide.
So this is Shepton. Sorry, I'll just stick where you were. Really sorry about that. So yes, Shepton was recently a Leverhulme International Fellow for her project, which was entitled Translation and Cetacean Communication Systems, Interactions and Synergies, when she was based as a research center in marine ecology in Canada and the US, with a particular focus on marine mammal bioacoustics and behavior studies. So this session is all about communication and giving you a chance to discuss the practicalities and ethics behind decoding cetacean communication. So whether you're a seasoned expert or you're just curious to learn more about her project, this is the perfect opportunity to get involved with her research.
And I'm going to go on to Emily Haig, who we've had before. So many of you will know Emily Haig from previous marine forums, and she has now finishing her PhD, and excitingly, she's headed to Shetland to launch a Scotland-wide survey, and that's launching today right here at the Marine Forum. So attendees can be the first to have their say and get involved. So please go speak to Emily. She's at a Blue Connect stand, which is going to be up here for you to join after lunch. So we're on HWT. Can we find that one? Okay, that's me. HWT will celebrate the role of citizen scientists in monitoring and protecting our seas. So you saw the boat Silurian before, and from their whale track community monitoring the decline of the West Coast community to members of the public joining out our marine mammal surveys and expeditions, they carry out visual, acoustic, and photographic surveys at sea. People empower conservation. So you can try your hand at their photo ID matching game. You can have a listen to their ADDs, and Siobhan and Pauline will look forward to chatting with you. They even have a Marine Forum exclusive 10% discount code if you would like to join one of their expedition surveys. So HWT will be upstairs after lunch. Where are we? BDMLR. Me. Staying on the that's not going to work anymore. So you're also going to be able to join Susan from British Divers Marine Life Rescue. Unfortunately, some of her colleagues are, as Marielle mentioned earlier, over on the West Coast at a disentanglement right now. But she is going to look at seal entanglement and what are the major contributors and how can we mitigate these. So please go and talk to Susan at the BDMLR stand. Anna.
Right, now to some smaller wildlife. Anna McGregor's project is focusing on oysters. So historic declines in oysters coincided with the loss of the Gaelic language along many parts of the western coast of Scotland. So following from increasing interest to revitalise both, this project aims to provide resources and activities to bring together learning and use of Gaelic language in places where oyster restoration could happen, based on evidence from relevant place names and stories and songs. So ultimately it aims to increase the use of the Gaelic language through community citizen science and build a social enterprise to support oyster restoration. So go and visit Anna and Claire's table to try out some of their ecosystem searches. Go skier. We're really well prepared, as you can tell. And we've also printed this in a way that I can't find what I'm saying for anything.
Go skier.
Thank you. So, Go Skier. This session is a collaboration between the Scottish Seabird Centre, the Scottish Coastal Cleanup and WDC, working together to tackle down the growing problem of ghost gear fishing around Scotland. Lost and discarded fishing gear is harming marine life and washing up on our shores, yet disposal options remain limited. So through this session, they really want to highlight the scale of this issue, to share the efforts in removal and prevention, and explore solutions for better management of end-of-life fishing gear. And they would really love to hear your thoughts and see if you can come up with some solutions of your own. So go see them upstairs. Christ. Yeah, uh-oh. 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 The next one is uh-oh. So for now, I'm just going to talk until you can think of it. Yeah. So Carol and Julia from SMASS will host an opportunity for people to learn more about the seal haul-out designation process and the challenges associated with designing sites, given seals move both within and across years. They're also interested to chat to people about their local knowledge of seal haul-out sites and areas they think are at risk of disturbance. So please do go find them during the afternoon session. This should be very easy to find. They brought a gigantic seal. It's upstairs.
And I have to apologize to Grant, who got a very last-minute email to put together a slide, which I have now not included in this presentation today. But Grant and Julia, also from SMRU, will be next door to Carol, and their interactive stand is on the East Coast bottlenose dolphins. So the Citizen Fins project helps to understand the range expansion. We used to consider the bottlenose dolphins here as the Murray Firth dolphins, then the northeast of Scotland dolphins, and now they are traveling all the way down to England. And so you can visit Grant up there and test your photo ID matching skills. And I hear they even have stickers and prizes and things like that. So I'm really sorry about this slide.
And this is George. Now, George probably doesn't need an introduction. He is a firm Marine Forum favorite, and he also hosted a series of behind-the-scenes tours yesterday, which were already great. But for those of you who couldn't make that, he has brought some bits and pieces from the museum galleries here as well, so you can find him and his bones downstairs in the lobby.
Okay, so I have not only missed out Grant's slide, I have also missed out the WDC slide, which goes to show I am equal opportunity missing out slides. So Emma Eastcott could stand up. Oh, she's waving up there. Have you noticed any changes in the Scottish seas over recent years and decades? Maybe you've seen shifts in the number of whales and dolphins, other changes to the marine environment. WDC is inviting you to share your thoughts and vision for the future through a very quick survey. So your perspective could help inspire others to restore Scottish seas. They will have a QR code. You could fill this out online, but also it might be a chance to just sit down for a moment. So Emma and colleagues Anna will be down here in the hallway down here if you would like to help them with their survey.
Right, and then finally, we at the SMASS team are present here as well. We'll have a little table downstairs. You can come and speak to us about basically anything, all aspects of SMASS that you would like to have a conversation about. If you want to ask Andrew, Ellie, or Rachel more about their projects, they will also be here. But what we are very keen to talk to you about is our app, Beach Track. Now, this will have come across your radar many of times, but this summer we're really making a big push to roll it out more and really improve our engagement, and we really want to hear from you how you would like to engage with the app, what we could incorporate to make things better. And we're also quite keen to sort of talk to people and groups that do things like beach cleans, because I think we can collect data for you guys as well. And finally, if you're a volunteer of SMASS and you have requested some bits and bobs, we also have those downstairs here. So you can come and find us and see us downstairs.
Okay, and this is the moment where we have to say goodbye to the folks online. We're thrilled that you've been able to join us live for this morning section, and unfortunately we aren't able to stream the afternoon panel discussion and our final keynote from Lindsay Porter, but we will include these in the video so you can watch them at a later point in time. For those of you who are here in the room with us, lunch is going to be laid out upstairs where coffee was, and again, you might want to take that lunch downstairs here and eat. It is now 1:45, and the interactive sessions are going to start at 2:15, so if we could let the session people get their food first, you can have a bit of time to eat and then wander around with your food. We're going to be back in here for 3:45 to start the panel discussion, and so you'll have about an hour and a half of interactive session time. All of the food is vegetarian. Some of the food is vegan, some of it is gluten-free, some of it is dairy-free, but could you please leave those sections for those people who actually need their food to be vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free as a priority, and then you can attack it later if they haven't finished it themselves. Thank you very much, everybody. Where are my slides? Where are my slides? Which ones did I change?
Andrew invited me to come to the Marine Forum until he told me what I was doing, which is trying to summarise this sort of fantastic group full of energy, passion, all from different walks of life, all striving towards the one thing, which is to make our oceans a better place to be. And for people like Andrew and I, having less dead animals to deal with, that would be pretty awesome, wouldn't it? So I've been trying. I thought my role today, part of it anyway, was to have a succinct, pithy, and perhaps amusing summary of what we have gone through today. So I've done my best in my lunch break, so forgive me that a lot of this is off the cuff. So this morning we heard Tom. What did you guys remember from Tom's talk?
Stories.
The what, sorry? I think, well, for me, it was the exploding gastric juices at the sperm whale. That's kind of stuck in my mind. And also what happens when you have far too many kayakers around foraging humpback whales.
We were far away going towards the shore.
Sorry?
We were far away going towards the shore.
Oh, okay. What fantastic imagery, because it is often that imagery that connects us with a feeling or a message or a time or a moment in space. And I have a fantastic story about Northern Right Wales ejaculating, but I'm going to serve that for the social afterwards, just in case it's not appropriate for everyone in the room. I certainly would never tell my mother. Andrew, you highlighted what it's almost like we take it for granted. Bycatch is the biggest threat that animals face today. And we say that within the International Whaling Commission often, but it's looking at the images, and for me it was the bubbles in the eyes of the Rizzle's dolphin. That was such a striking image, and it really, for me, highlighted the individual stress and trauma that bycaught animals go through, and how we have to get better at not only understanding just how many individuals and species are impacted, but what we can do about it. So thank goodness you were followed by Beep, because that did make me think, do you know what a proactive, wonderful way to collect really critical information in a timely manner, which is why you and I are going to become best friends, and we're going to talk about how maybe we can do something similar in some of the parts of the world that I work in. Really, well, it seems like such a fantastic initiative. And not, of course, I can't see Ellie, because I don't have my glasses on. Is Ellie still here? And the Entanglement Alliance. And that, of course, I know about the work that you've been involved in, and know a little bit about how that has been working across communities, particularly with fishermen, to better understand how and why animals get entangled, but more importantly, what we can do to prevent that, hopefully, possibly moving on, but also how do we help those animals in the moment where there is an entanglement? How do we use our experience and our expertise and some of our training from the International Whaling Commission, which I will move on to later on, to try and help those animals in those moments of distress? Because without intervention, we certainly would have lost that humpback whale that we saw this morning on the presentation that you gave us, Valerie. The other thing that struck me about Ellie's talk, not only that it's your birthday today, happy birthday, because we are all about humans and we remember this. We're going to remember this from now on, that the Marine Forum is in honour of your birthday. But also that we've had so many humpback whales within the last 10 weeks. What's going on there? How can we find out more about that? And that is where science will be our friend, and hopefully citizen science too. Because we sometimes think, I feel, that we identify a problem like bycatch, but then we kind of also forget that the environment within which that occurs is shifting and dynamic. So what might be a solution, or what we think we know today, could be totally different in 10 weeks, or 10 months, or 10 years' time. So we always have to keep that in our mind, that solutions that we find today are not the forever solutions, that we always need to keep focusing on the changes within our marine environment and how we can equip ourselves and be ready to mitigate any detrimental changes as we move forward. See, I got loads from everyone's talks this morning. Ed, connection with nature. Ed, I really loved your talk because you did bring up for the first time today how scientific data also must include Indigenous knowledge. Do you know, in Asia, we would never, ever embark upon a scientific study in communities unless we understood the Indigenous knowledge first. And I haven't worked in Scotland or in Europe in quite a few decades, and I think, and to me that was a bit of an eye-opener, because in our part of the world that is key, that is very much part of what our scientific studies are, is to understand what is already known and to build on that and to engage the communities who are close to the sea in Asia, which is pretty much an island region, and understand what is already known before we try and move forward and translate that and build on that to put that into scientific peer-reviewed papers or into policy or management decisions. And I love as well, Ed, that you said we had to bring emotion back into the equation. I think this is the wrong audience to have this story with. This is the emotion is what I need to bring back to the International Whaling Commission. We should stop being quite so dry. and quite so rigorous and robust, and bring it back to the human. We are connected to the ocean, and without our human emotions or our human engagement, we're not going to seek any policy change at all. Okay, right. Julia, what I loved, I can't see Julia. Julia, who told us about the study she conducted on killer whales. I love the fact that such ocean-going animals were studied from the shore. We do sometimes forget as researchers or collecting data that we too can have a significant impact on the animals that we are studying. Having everything conducted from the land and looking at those close to shore observations not only connects it more with the humans, who tend to be a wee bit closer to shore than out at sea, and also that citizen science was key for your project. 9 out of 130 plus observations were only collected by the researcher. So this is an instance where having citizens, having that spread, having that increased effort made that scientific study and led to an improved understanding of seals and killer whales in the area that was under review. Susie and Bali, what a stellar example of collaboration to find positive solutions. Even in Hong Kong, we know about your story. We don't have creels in Hong Kong, but we definitely have bottom-mounted fishing gear. And I do occasionally talk to our fishermen about how it's not us and them, it is about working together to come up with solutions. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Oh, and I can't read my own writing for that, but it says something lovely about that you need to take the knowledge that is embedded in communities. And I think I must have been thinking about fishing communities, because who else to solve problems of how to fish more efficiently and sustainably than asking the fishermen themselves. Sometimes I think we spend too long in our own boxes and reinventing the wheel, or thinking about solutions that perhaps are not appropriate because they're not based on experience or expertise. Julia, you spoke to us about the youth, which apparently I'm not anymore, because I was asked to ask my younger self a question. But no one acts or reacts as unreservedly as our youth. Anyone here who has teenage kids knows that for sure. Young people are critical to affecting long-lasting change, because the change we want to see now is change that goes beyond my lifetime and long into the lifetime of my children and my grandchildren. We need the youth to question what is previously embedded or just accepted within our policies and within our habits and within the way that we conduct our practices, whether it's in the ocean or on land. And we need to have those concepts challenged if we are to have effective change, and they need to be challenged and embraced by the youth, or they will never last. Thomas invited us to embrace AI, but only the bits of it that help us handle big data. And more with information, and I can see community and citizen science growing and growing. We have these massive data sets, and we have to be able to learn or to open our minds to using new tools. And that is what AI is going to help us do, and will certainly help Thomas and his team understand more about Rizzo's dolphins, which are incredibly poorly studied around Scottish waters and indeed around the world. Nick, I love the way that you, Nick, where have you gone? Nick, oh sorry, you're right there. I don't actually have my glasses on, so I'm not focusing at all. I love the way that you spoke about having a campaign or a mission, because that is such a good way to think about where you want to be. Sometimes when you react to something and you have that rage that Simon has boiling inside him all the time, you need to direct that in an effective manner. And I think that's the message that I'll take home to my team, is we need to think about the work that we do and all the different pathways that we'll take in more and more of a campaign. And I like that you want us to stay human at the same time. Danny, you gave us a very strong message that human activities are at the heart of the marine planning that you conduct. And he urges, my feeling was, he urged us all to submit comments to these formal processes, because Danny and his team are listening, they are incorporating those comments into the work that they are doing. So your voice is being heard strongly in that level, from understanding the community or the habitat or what you want to see within it, and then putting that directly into policy. So that for me was a very positive message coming from the Orkneys and the marine planning to coming there. I did not get, oh, and don't be scared about policy. I've written here sumo, because I was thinking about that sumo wrestler graphic that was put up. Don't be scared of the sumo wrestler. I'm from Asia, I know sumo wrestlers, they're lovely. Don't be scared of policy. It's not this great big scary beast. And you can use it, you can be part of it to bring about the changes that you need sometimes. The interactive sessions, I did not get to spend enough time with all of the groups, of all the groups that I went round, and I'm sorry if I didn't get a chance to speak to you personally, but what a fantastic way for this group to not be sitting on their bottoms listening to really cool talks or really depressing talks, but actually to engage with the people who are in the front line of affecting change. I would particularly like to highlight Emily Haig's work, Sprue's work, and SMASS's work, who have all put out a call for people to contribute to their apps, to their programs, so that you too can help build those databases so we understand more about what the Shetland community wishes, where seal sites are hauling out, because we cannot protect seals. Carol said to me, we can't protect seals, but we can protect the habitats in which they live. And sea mammal research can't survey all of Scotland, though I'm sure they would love to, but this is a golden opportunity to contribute to science that directly feeds into policy that protects habitats. And for SMASS, it is the beach track, the effort-based information that comes into the app. I love that. That is, because I am a scientist, so we have the quantitative information going into that app, and it's something that you can do while you're having a lovely time walking along the beach, while you're out there enjoying nature, help the SMASS team get some really critical information at the same time. And I have a particular call out to Emily. You had fudge on your table. Thank you, thank you. That brought me to your table. I sniffed out the sweeties. Thank you. I enjoyed the WDC multi-acronymed Scottish Coastal Cleanup and BirdLife International. Was that the three groups together? The fact that you brought the nets and the gear to the table made me think about that humpback whale. That was one creel on the table. That's quite a big chunky piece of equipment, and that poor whale was trying to pull it. How many, Bally? About 30 of them. And it really brings it into perspective as to, for me, why that particular animal was struggling, and just the challenges that are faced with this type of not only bycatch, but also how fishermen we can't make their lives harder because it's already a hard job. So how do we just make it better? And that really brought it home as to one of the challenges for bycatch for the animals, and also for working with great big chunky pieces of equipment or pieces of fishing gear in sometimes a hostile environment. How did you get the weather to be so good that day? I don't think I've ever surveyed or looked up there, and I mean it was fortuitous. Okay, I have lost my, no I haven't. Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, a fine example of long-term monitoring, and also how whale watching, how commercial whale watching provides this fantastic platform to gather data, and in the long term, we must never forget that the animals that we as scientists or we as passionate conservationists or naturalists look at probably live a little bit longer than we do, or we do in the time that we are enjoying their company. So these long-term monitoring programs are critical to understand single animals within the larger groups of the cetaceans and seals that live around us. Oysters, how could I not talk about oysters? I know almost nothing about oysters, except 80% of oysters grown in this country come to Hong Kong, where I live. Thank you, Scotland. And also we do in Hong Kong recently too, we've been trying to restore our oyster beds, but we haven't lost. And what struck me almost immediately when I went to look at that interactive space was that we haven't lost the Chinese language or culture, written or spoken, in Hong Kong and the area around about it. So we could look at old place names and understand what species or what part of the habitat or ecosystem they used to be that they were related to. And how sad that that was nearly lost. Because we lost the language, we could have lost all of that rich environmental knowledge too. And just fantastic work to the group. Anna, and I didn't write down the name of the other person, it could be Rachel. Claire, Anna and Claire, what a fantastic combination of culture and conservation. Really, really inspiring to see what you're doing. Thank you for sharing that. George, bones. I love bones. And one reason I love bones is because it gives us an idea of just how mammoth the animals are we study. Even for those of us who spend a lot of time on the water, you only get to see, what, a 10th part of their body. You rarely get to understand how big they are. Unless, of course, you're Andrew and you've dissected a sperm whale or two, and then you're very aware of how difficult and how large these species are. But I think bones are a lovely way not only to highlight the size of the cetaceans that live within our environment, but also the similarity between their skeletal structure and what we kind of look like as humans on the inside, and that helps to connect us again. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge the presence of Celia, the seal, again bringing a life-sized animal to the show, again helps us to connect how fantastic the species are that we look at, but also just the scale of what we are trying to achieve when it comes to entanglement or when it comes to study animals. So all in all, just what a marvelous day. And there were so many messages to take home that I'm going to need a week, I think, to process and download. I'm so thankful that you invited me. I had no idea what today was going to be like, and it has been just fantastic.